Chapter 760. Did your parents teach you all this? Well, it's mainly because of my father, Sharon nodded. He always said that there are a lot of mistakes in this world, but because no one stood up to correct them, the mistakes were allowed to continue. Over time, people got used to it. Common things don't equal to right things. Everyone is just repeating the same mistakes. The more such situations occur, the worse the world will become. Unfortunately, as long as they don't endanger themselves, most people won't stand up, Vendi said slowly. Just like the persecution of witches by the church, the people only focused on the 25 golden dragon bounties, but they never cared whether the children who were hanged were really evil or not. That's wrong, Sharon replied. If the world becomes bad, it's everyone's business. Some mistakes that seem to have nothing to do with themselves will one day spread to themselves. Vendi could not help but be a little interested in her parents for raising such a child. When she pretended to ask casually, Sharon's answer greatly surprised her. They're not my parents. They're not? Yes, my parents have passed away. The girl's eating speed also slowed down as she said these words. After Eagle City was destroyed in the war, the order of the Southern Territory was broken. Homeless refugees and beggars could be seen everywhere, and the number of robbers also increased. My parents were members of the patrol team. When they resisted the robbers, they couldn't come back. After the Lord fled, the townspeople had to leave the town one after another. Maplewood Town should have become a deserted territory now. In other words, this tragedy was caused by the order for the selection of the Crown Prince. In a sense, it also proved her father's words that seemingly unrelated mistakes would eventually spread to everyone. Vendi touched Sharon's head apologetically and said, "Sorry to mention these things." "It's okay." The little girl's expression quickly returned to normal. It was obvious that she was not immersed in the grief of losing her family. In fact, when they set off, they were already prepared. My father often said that instead of paying the price for a mistake, it's better to put the price on correcting the mistake. The former is a crime, the latter is an honor. Vendi immediately sighed with emotion. For most of the patrolmen in a town, their rule of survival was similar to that of a rat, which was to absorb benefits while maintaining a special order. When there was a conflict between order and benefits, there was no doubt that order would be the one to make changes. It was truly surprising to see people like Sharon's parents. After a long silence, she asked, "Then the person who came to see you is?" "A friend of my father's. He helped me before." Sharon licked her fingers. "I've been living with Uncle Cormac for the past 2 years. They don't have any children, so I'm like their own. So that's how it is." Vendi was silent. To be able to do this was a very rare thing for an ordinary family. She stopped asking questions and watched the little girl finish her dinner. Sharon heaved a sigh of relief after swallowing the last piece of fried meat. Her expression was full of satisfaction. "Thank you. This is the best thing I've ever eaten." Although Neverwinter was now rich in resources and people no longer had to worry about filling their stomachs, meat was still a scarce commodity. For an ordinary person, putting a piece of jerky in their oatmeal was already an unimaginable luxury. As for this kind of semi-lean meat fried in hot oil, only high-paid people such as alchemists and city hall managers could afford it. Vendi took out a handkerchief and wiped Sharon's glossy lips with a smile. "After you join the Witch Union, you'll be able to eat this kind of food every day." "Really?" Sharon's eyes lit up. "Can I eat meat every day?" "Of course. And it's not the marinated meat sold in the convenience market. It's fresh wild boar," Vendi said while cleaning up the lunchbox. "His Majesty likes the part with a mixture of fat and lean meat, but not every boar has it. Only the very fat ones can be found. They're very suitable for steaming or frying. The first one is soft and tender and melts immediately in the mouth. The second one is burnt and crispy, which can whet people's appetite just by smelling it. By the way, he likes to call this part 5 flowers. Although I don't know which part has anything to do with flowers. Thanks to Lightning and Maggie, they were able to eat these. Their favorite pastime was to cook game when they were patrolling. In the past, they could only bring back some roasted rabbits or bird eggs. Since Maggie could transform into a 2-winged devil beast, The efficiency of catching game had doubled. Now, she could bring back whole boars and snow wolves. Especially when His Majesty was in need, he could often fill the basement of the castle with prey in a day. His Majesty had always said that the misty forest was a great treasure trove. Now she was starting to believe it. At least in terms of providing delicious food, the forest played an important role. Why do you know this? Could it be? Sharon covered her mouth and exclaimed. Vendi could not help but smile. Yes, it's because of that. As long as he's not too busy, His Majesty always eats with the witches. About the golden dragon reward. It's also true. I can also. The girl pointed at herself. Join the witch union? Vendi chuckled. Of course. In fact, the union not only teaches witches how to use their abilities properly, but also looks after and protects them. As long as they're willing to serve His Majesty and Neverwinter, they're all our sisters. Do I have to live in the castle after joining? That's up to you. If you want to spend time with your family, you can live in your own home. Although Sharon was not related to Uncle Cormac by blood, they obviously regarded each other as family. What about the classes in the academy? There are special courses for witches because we have a faster ability to accept and learn more things. The knowledge used to promote universal education is not suitable for us. Vendi paused. But considering your age, you'll still focus on ability training at the beginning, and the classes will be arranged at night. As long as you can take care of both, you can still go to the academy for a while until you graduate. Sharon no longer hesitated. She nodded vigorously. I want to join the witch union. I want to be like Nana. Even if she did not answer, Vendi could see the answer in the girl's eyes. Just like before, Sharon knew every choice she had made. It seems that the ability test and contract signing can be brought forward, Wendy thought. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 761. The next afternoon, Roland received Sharon's ability report. So soon? He raised his eyebrows and took the test form from Vendi. Has she accepted herself as a witch? Yes, and she's even calmer than we expected. Vendi smiled and told him about their meeting last night. I have to say, her parents have taught an excellent child. So that's how it is. Roland couldn't help but feel a little moved. In this era, someone who could think so far ahead was already considered a pioneer. Perhaps history was driven in this way. When the belief was passed on to the later generations, more and more people would pursue it until it reached a certain level, and the world would be turned upside down. It was the same principle that a single spark could start a prairie fire. Perhaps this was how human beings moved toward civilization. He carefully read the test process and the magic power judgment. As a 15-year-old witch who had awakened, Sharon's magic cyclone was above average. The report even indicated that her level was comparable to some adult tequila witches. It seemed that Phyllis was also present during the ability test. Whenever a new witch appeared, she would be the most enthusiastic one in Neverwinter. Sharon's ability was to generate electricity, but Vendi's description of this part was vague. Obviously, electricity was still a difficult part of elementary physics. When she increased the intensity of the electric current, the magic power consumption would increase rapidly. However, the current was as powerful as thunder and could easily pierce through wood and melt iron. When she switched to a weaker current, she had to touch an object to be effective. She could light a light bulb, but the filament could easily be burned. Since Sharon had just awakened, her control of magic power was very unstable. Vendi concluded that she was a combat witch with the potential to assist in production. Roland did not intend to do the test again. After all, he did not have any tools to judge voltage or current. Even if he knew these parameters, he could not get an accurate value. Moreover, releasing high-voltage current consumed a lot of her magic power. Obviously, the continuity of power transmission was not as good as Mystery Moon's Dawn Eye, let alone the electromagnetic gun. Most importantly, whether it was Anna's Blackfire or Sharon's electric current, they were all transformed from magic power and did not necessarily conform to the relevant theory. Only when the ability was transformed into another effect would he be able to match the knowledge he was familiar with. All in all, This was an ability with great potential. What kind of evolution would occur after understanding the nature of electricity, as well as how much magic power would increase after reaching adulthood, were all questions worth looking forward to. As for now, according to Vendi's suggestion, she should practice on her own and study hard at the same time so that she could catch up to everyone else's progress as soon as possible. Considering Sharon's strong sense of justice, it seemed like a good idea to let her join the Ministry of Justice. A little girl who could discharge electricity, constantly patrolling the streets, and ready to arrest criminals at any time, this feeling was really, exceptionally familiar. However, Roland did not say what he was thinking. He nodded to Vendi and said, "Let's do it." "Thank you." "It's my pleasure, Your Majesty," Vendi said with her hand on her chest. After dinner, when Roland returned to his office, he found that in addition to Nightingale, Lily and Mystery Moon were also in the room. The three of them surrounded the desk and seemed to be arguing about something. "Come and look at this." Nightingale waved at him. "Oh my God, it's exactly the same as the real thing." "What's exactly the same?" Curious, Roland walked to the desk and noticed that there were 2 pots of bird beak mushrooms on the desk. What's wrong with these mushrooms?" It was not true that they looked the same. One of the mushrooms was slightly shriveled, like the stock in the kitchen, while the other was much more juicy. He pinched the stem of the mushroom, which was relatively plump, and the juice inside immediately gushed out. "It's quite fresh. Did lightning just pick it?" Nightingale and Mystery Moon both turned to look at Lily. The latter shrugged and said, "I used magic power to accelerate it." "Oh, it's magic power," Roland replied casually. Then he suddenly froze. "Wait a minute, what? You used magic power to accelerate it?" "Your Majesty, the form of her condensed magic power is somewhat different from before," Nightingale said. "If the first evolution was a purple reptile, now it has more patterns on its body, and the total amount of magic power has also increased." She paused for a moment. "In other words, Lily's ability has undergone a second evolution." "But it's still a worm," Mystery Moon added, and of course, Lily rolled her eyes. "Is that so?" Roland happily picked up the mushroom and carefully looked at it. Soon he understood what Lily meant by accelerate it. "You can now make the magic worm swarm into the form you want?" "Yes, it's only limited to what can be seen with a microscope, and I have to find a target that can be fused before I can proceed to the next step of assimilation." Lily nodded. Although she pretended to be very calm, the light in her eyes betrayed her pride. "Since the tiny worm seedlings produced by the bird beak mushrooms are easier to observe, I chose it for the experiment." She was probably referring to the fungal spores, which were the basis of the formation of fungi. Roland could not help but be excited. Perhaps for Lily, any living creature that was invisible to the naked eye, or even the smallest worm, would be under her control. "Good job." He stretched out his hand and rubbed her head. Unexpectedly, Lily did not avoid it, nor did she roll her eyes. Instead, she lowered her head and accepted Roland's praise. "Not good at all," Mystery Moon complained. "You don't know, the bedroom is completely uninhabitable now. There are bird beak mushrooms everywhere, and even the bed is covered with big white umbrellas. It's like the misty forest after a rain." Lily's cheeks suddenly became a little red. She stared at Mystery Moon and said, I don't know why it became like this. At first, the worm seedlings couldn't turn into bird beak mushrooms no matter what. I thought it was a problem with the mother, and then I changed to another one. I didn't expect that suddenly the whole room would be filled with mushrooms." After understanding the whole story, Roland could not help but laugh. Based on his pitiful biological knowledge, he vaguely remembered that unlike a seed that could grow into a tree, a single mushroom's spores could not grow into a mushroom. No matter how much it assimilated, it was still a spore. It was only after the mother had changed and combined with another spore that it quickly grew into a mushroom. As for why it was everywhere, it was very likely that the mother that was left floating in the bedroom had assimilated all the bacteria in the room into the bird beak mushroom spores. "Let's have a mushroom feast for lunch tomorrow," he said excitedly. Without a doubt, Lily's ability after her second evolution was not limited to sterilization. As long as it could be observed, It could be transformed on a large scale. The cost was almost zero, and it could also multiply and expand like normal microorganisms. It could be called a perfect miniature army. Whether it was used for food production or to prepare for future wars, she could play a great role. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 762. Flames erupted from the ground like giant trees baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. The moving flame tips were its branches, and the billowing smoke formed its leaves. They were intertwined to form a vast black canopy. Walking under the orange-red cinder tree, Thurum felt the temperature around him rising. Bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on his forehead and his back became sticky. This place was like a different world from the cold desert outside. The cold wind of the months of demons could not corrode the core area of the Mother Earth. Is this why it's called the Land of Fire? The golden-haired divine lady looked around curiously. I didn't expect there to be such an interesting place in the southernmost region. After a week of getting along, Thurum had a preliminary understanding of the people brought by Iron Axe. For example, the divine lady who spoke was called Andrea. She was good at archery, and even the most experienced hunter of the Sand Nation could not compare with her exquisite archery skills. There was no doubt that she would participate in the upcoming holy duel with the powerful divine Lady Ashes. Interesting. Ashes twitched the corner of her mouth. I just feel like this place is like a steamer. If an ordinary person stayed here for 2 days, he would probably become a human jerky. I'm not surprised that you would say such a thing. Andrea shrugged. You lack taste and style, so you naturally can't appreciate the customs here. Don't you want to dry your sweat before you praise? You can't see any style when you're sweating all over. Go away. Thurum could not help but agree with the golden-haired divine lady. The most beautiful place in the entire southernmost region was not the Silver Stream Oasis, which brought the Majin clan a place to live and multiply, but the Land of Fire and the Endless Cape, where the earth fire never ceased. Although full of danger, they also symbolized great power, were the residents of the gods, and were where the Sand Nation's faith was. One was used to compete for status and power, and to show the Mother Earth the bravery and tenacity of the clan. The other was used as a sacrifice, hoping that the Son of the Sea could bless the clan and inject more blood into the Silver Stream, so that new oases could grow in the desert. Especially the Land of Fire, the whole area was sunken and slightly raised in the middle, like an upside-down basin, which could almost contain several iron sand cities. The never-ending fire had caused the surrounding sand to harden and solidify. Walking on it was like stepping into a palace covered with stone bricks. Apart from the wide and solid road, there were black abysses and shafts on both sides. The underground fire was spurting out from these shafts, constantly roasting this piece of land. But the most shocking thing was the color. Any Sand Nation would be attracted by the gorgeous colors when they first entered the sacred land. Starting from the abyss, the rock walls on both sides showed a gradually changing crimson luster, and the closer it was to the surface, the darker it became, like a piece of red and translucent charcoal that was continuously cooling. However, when it reached the ground, the color suddenly turned into a bright green. It was as if the sand was covered with a layer of crystal-clear jade. It was a glass-like object formed by the crystallization of the melted gravel, reflecting a dazzling brilliance against the background of the flames. Further up was the eternal theme of this place, the orange-red flames. Dozens of fire pillars spewed out from the basin, surrounding the high platform in the center, as if welcoming the arrival of new challengers. It was also the core of the Land of Fire, the venue for the holy duel. The alternating red and green, together with the black water underground and the golden sand dunes in the distance, at first glance, it seemed that all the colors in the desert had been concentrated in this area. If it were not for the months of demons, they could still see the sunlight through the thick smoke. Only the burning endless cape at the bottom of the sea could be compared to such a marvelous scene. I also think it's beautiful here. It would be better if there were no killing and bloodshed. His new master, Princess Drow's Silver Moon of Osha, suddenly said, just like His Majesty said, if it's only for appreciation, it will definitely become famous. National Nature Park? Another short divine lady hummingbird interrupted. Yes, that's what he said when he checked the devil's town behind the snow mountain. No wonder he's the king of a country. He's thinking exactly the same as me. Andrea raised her chin. Come on, have you seen what he said? Ashes said sarcastically. Can't you use your brain if you haven't seen it? Just from the literal meaning, it must be referring to a place with magnificent scenery. Of course, people with shallow knowledge and experience will definitely not understand. Tisk. Whether it was Iron Axe or the Divine Ladies, they would inadvertently mention the name of the King of Grey Castle during their conversation. Thuram was very curious about what kind of person Roland Wimbledon was that he could win the trust of the Sand Nation and the Divine Ladies, especially the latter. He remembered that the traveling merchant had once mentioned that the highly respected Divine Ladies of the Majin clan were merely evil targets hunted by the Church in the Four Kingdoms. However, their attitude toward the king was obviously different from what the merchant had said. When they reached the platform, the warriors of the Cut-Bone clan, who had been waiting for a long time, hissed. The onlookers from the other clans looked on coldly. The earth-shattering thunder in Iron Sand City had undoubtedly shocked them. Later, Thuram learned that the stone castle where Rebecca, the chief of the Iron Whip clan, lived had collapsed in the explosion, along with his blood relatives and subordinates. As a result, the 6 clans had been reduced to 5, and it would be a long time before they could replenish their numbers. However, revenge was a matter of course for the Sand Nation. The blood feud between the Iron Whip clan and the Osha clan was not a secret. Moreover, the foreign warriors did not invade Iron Sand City, so Drow Silvermoon's revenge was impeccable. Therefore, the other clans were shocked and fearful, and all that was left was indifference. Unfortunately, they did not know that the purpose of the Osha clan this time was beyond everyone's imagination. Thuram thought that the Cut-Bone clan was just the beginning. Sooner or later, the other clans present would step down from the spectator seats and become Drow Silvermoon's opponents. They would either be defeated or become Drow Silvermoon's stepping stones. The chief of the Wild Flame clan, as the arbitrator, walked to the front of the crowd and said, "The chief of the Osha clan, please step forward." Drow took a deep breath, took a step forward and said slowly, "Yes, I am." The other party nodded expressionlessly and said, "Very well. This is not your first time participating in a holy duel, so you should understand the rules. The Cut-Bone clan will send a total of 22 warriors to participate in the duel. Now choose weapons for your warriors. You are allowed to give up or surrender, but you must not violate your oath to the 3 gods. Until there is no one left standing on the platform, the winner will win the right to enter Iron Sand City. Let's begin when you're ready." For the fastest and most up-to-date novel reading, please visit Chapter 763. Weapon racks were placed on both sides of the high platform for the 2 dueling parties to choose from. From swords to whips, all common weapons were included. The reason why they were not allowed to bring their own weapons was to ensure as much fairness as possible. For example, the big clans were fully capable of forging more sophisticated blades, while the challengers were basically poor, so it was easy to imagine the quality of the weapons they were used to. If the disparity was too great, the duel would lose its original meaning. However, Thuram knew that there was still a way out. The Iron Whip clan had defeated the Osha clan with the stolen Blackwater Whip. Although the Arbiter had severely punished the weapon keeper, the defeat of the Osha clan was already a foregone conclusion. No one would compete with the big clans of Iron Sand City for a declining clan that had fallen apart. It was just that no one had expected that this person who was about to die would one day be reborn from the ashes. It was so powerful that even the capital of the clan felt the pressure. It was the first time he had seen the Wild Flame leader treat a new challenger with such a serious expression. "Is there a rule that one person can only bring one weapon?" Ashes suddenly asked. There's no such rule." Thuram came to his senses. "As long as you can carry it, you can take as many as you want." "Very well, I'm ready." She first sheathed the 2 scimitars at her waist, then grabbed a long-handled iron hammer and weighed it in her hand. Finally, she put on a square wooden shield. "These should be enough for me to use until the duel is over." Thuram swallowed. Although he had long known that this black-haired, golden-eyed divine lady was extraordinarily strong, it was still too outrageous for her to be this strong. Ordinary people had to go through many years of training to use a two-handed hammer, but she could actually hold it with one hand and wave it as easily as a rapier. Such an opponent was simply a nightmare for the enemy. Apparently, she had not used her full strength during the conflict in the tavern. Otherwise, it was possible that she would have broken the skull wine cup with her bare hands. Me too. Andrea randomly picked a short bow and deliberately reduced the number of arrows in the quiver to 22. Then get on the stage, Iron Axe said in a deep voice. Wait. Thuram could not help but be stunned. Only 4 of you are participating in the duel? He glanced at the Grey Castle warriors behind him. The 50 of them were spread out around the weapon rack with their backs facing each other. They stared at the other onlookers with vigilance. They had no intention of choosing their weapons. The holy duel doesn't stipulate that the number of people must be the same, right? Ashes said indifferently. 4 people are enough. According to the rules, the number of warriors participating in the duel should be between 15 to 30. This was the limit set in consideration of the high platform. However, there was another rule that the number of challengers could not exceed the number of the challenged clan. In other words, if the opponent only sent out 15 people, then Osha could only send out 15 people at most. This consideration was based on a cruel fact. No matter who won or lost the duel, the warriors on the field would face heavy losses. It was common for more than half of the warriors to die or be injured, and even the situation of fighting to the last man would occasionally happen. Obviously, the more people that participated in the duel, the more the clan's strength would be weakened, to the point that it was relatively rare for the clan to send 30 people to a duel. Unless the clan knew beforehand that the challenger couldn't gather 30 powerful warriors, only then would they use this method to obtain an advantage in overall combat strength. Therefore, the Cutbone clan set the number of warriors at 22, no doubt planning that even if they lost the duel, it would not have too much impact on the clan. Falling from the ruler of Iron Sand City to the challenger did not mean that the clan was completely finished. As long as there were still brave warriors in the clan, there was a chance for a comeback. The correct way for Osha to deal with the duel was to send out an equal number of people. Although the Grey Castle warriors looked short, thin, and not brave, as long as Ashes was there, Osha would still have a great advantage. Her innate strength, which was not affected by the god's stone of retaliation, was more than enough to control the outcome of the duel. However, the situation would be completely different if there were 4 people on the field. The Divine Lady's advantage was that she had led the clan to survive in the cruel desert. She was the object of people's admiration, but she was not necessarily suitable for combat. Moreover, the duelists usually wore God's stones of retaliation, which could easily suppress the Divine Lady's ability and make her even weaker than ordinary people. Once Drow Silvermoon and Andrea lost their combat strength, only Iron Axe and Ashes would be left on the field. No matter how strong Ashes was, it would be impossible for her to deal with more than 20 people at the same time. After all, if the other side fought with their lives on the line, even if they had extraordinary strength, they would only be able to punch and kick. How could they defend all sides? Thuram had thought that Iron Axe, who had participated in a holy duel, would be familiar with such common sense. Moreover, they did not ask him to sit in on the discussion of the duel, so he did not pay too much attention to this matter. He did not expect that this group of people would be so careless. He stared dumbfoundedly at the 4 people walking up to the high platform. He could not help but shiver. Sweat was dripping from his forehead, but he still felt like he was standing naked in the cold desert. It was as if the blooming fire trees around him could no longer shelter him from the raging cold wind. After all, he was now a member of the Osha clan. If this group of people were defeated, would he still be able to stand in the small oasis? He was afraid that he would not even be able to stay in the southernmost region. If he had known this would happen, he would rather throw all his clansmen to them than get involved in this muddy water. The appearance of the 4 people also brought a strong shock to the others. It was a symbol of confidence and bravery to fight the majority with only a few people, but to fight against 22 battle-hardened tribal warriors with only 4 people? This was no different from suicide. The booing instantly disappeared. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open. The indifference on their faces gradually turned into surprise and solemnity. Are you sure there are only 4 of you in Osha? Faced with such a strange scene, the chief of Wild Flame could not help but ask. Yes. Ashes raised the corner of her mouth. Let's get started. By the way, you should have written your wills in advance, right? The audience was in an uproar. Who is this guy? She's too arrogant. Even if she's a divine lady, it's impossible for her to block the god's stone arrow, right? Wait, why do I feel that she's serious? I feel the same way. This guy's hands are stained with no less blood than mine. Are you sure? I'm a warrior, I can understand this. You're telling me that she's very scary. But there are only 4 of them. Won't we know the answer after a while? In less than a quarter of an hour, the situation on the sidelines had changed dramatically. All the clansmen focused their attention on the high platform. Their previous indifference had melted away. Regardless of whether they were courting death or not, their courage alone was commendable. The people of the Sand Nation would never be stingy with their respect for true warriors. Listening to the discussion from the platform, Thurum could not help but hesitate. Were they really confident of winning in the face of such a huge disadvantage in numbers? Just as his heart was filled with mixed feelings and thoughts, the arbitrator rang the gong hanging in the corner of the high platform. Then I hereby announce that the sacred duel between the Osha clan and the Cutbone clan begins now. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 764. As soon as the order was given, the warriors of the Cutbone clan immediately drew their weapons and surrounded them from both sides of the platform. No matter how confident Osha appeared, there were only 4 of them in the end. With such a small number of people, they could not even control the territory of their own half of the field. When the 22 people completed the encirclement, Osha would fall into the predicament of being attacked from both sides. As warriors who lived by dueling, they had no scruples in such a life-and-death battle. From the moment they stepped onto the platform, they had already dedicated their lives to the 3 gods. This was a fight for power, but also a fight to please the gods. Then they heard a melancholic song. Drow Silvermoon's song instantly drowned out the roar of the ground fire and the roar of the Styx River. The song was ethereal and sweet, as if it came from the distant sky. However, it contained a strong sense of loss, pain, and mourning. Anyone who heard it could not help but want to cry. The Cutbone warriors could not help but stop in their tracks. No. Stop. What are you doing? Stop. You're desecrating the Holy Land. Traitors. I'll kill you. The expressions of the onlookers suddenly changed. Some pointed at the Cutbone clan and shouted abuse, while others covered their faces and cried, as if they had encountered something extremely sad. Thurum could not believe his eyes. He saw the Cutbone warriors turn around and kill their own clansmen. In the blink of an eye, the platform was splashed with hot blood. Scimitars pierced through intestines, and heads rolled off the platform one by one. Their faces were still full of shock and disbelief. Together with the melancholic song, it was as if they were narrating the shocking massacre. However, it was only for a short moment. When he blinked again, the tragic scene in front of him disappeared without a trace. The 22 warriors were still moving forward, but their steps were much slower. They could not help it. The clansmen behind them were supposed to be their strongest support and spiritual sustenance. They had risked their lives for their clans and won power, and their clansmen had cheered for them and regarded them as heroes. But now, the situation was completely reversed. The cries and curses of their clansmen made them feel bewildered. Even the other clans in charge of Iron Sand City glared at them, as if they had committed some unforgivable crime. Warriors were not afraid of powerful enemies, but they could not ignore the reprimand of their brothers and sisters. Was this the power of Osha Princess? But how was that possible? It was not that Thurum had never seen a power that could manipulate people's minds. For example, Kaba of the Sandstone clan was a powerful divine lady with a similar ability. However, He had never heard of a divine lady being able to make this kind of illusory power go beyond the range of 10 steps. He touched the god's stone of retaliation hanging around his neck and looked at the place where his new master, Drow Silvermoon, was standing far more than 10 steps away from the platform. Was it really because of her singing that those half-naked people, who were obviously not wearing god's stones, were crying bitterly? He believed that the cut-bone warrior had the same question. In a duel, this hesitation was fatal. Everything happened in an instant. The moment they slowed down, Andrea made the first move. She did not take off the short bow on her back. Instead, she pulled out an arrow and threw it at the nearest duelist. Perhaps it was because they were affected by the situation outside the arena, or because their opponents did not have bows and thus lowered their vigilance, the cut-bone warriors did not immediately block the arrows. When they saw the arrowheads, which were no different from arrows leaving the bowstring, flying straight at them, it was too late to dodge. The 4 arrows were no less powerful than a shot from a fully drawn bow. Each arrow pierced through the right side of the target's collarbone and lodged in the bone, rendering the dominant hand that held the sword unable to exert any strength. As a result, the 4 duelists completely lost the ability to fight. A gap suddenly appeared in the encirclement. The song that reverberated on the high platform suddenly changed from the previous mournful tune to an impassioned and sonorous one. Every beat of the drum seemed to be pounding on the heart, making people's blood boil uncontrollably. Ashes's figure was like a dark shadow. She once again demonstrated her unreasonable strength. Even though she was carrying a giant hammer and a wooden shield, her footsteps were still as smooth as flowing water. She blocked with her left hand and swung the hammer with her right. No one could withstand a single blow from her. Moreover, she did not use the hammerhead to smash people into pieces. Instead, she held the hammer handle horizontally and dashed around the stage. Soon, 6 or 7 people fell to the ground at her feet. The cut-bone warriors, who had the advantage in numbers, were in a dilemma. If they continued to split up and surround the encirclement from both sides, they would not be able to bypass Ashes and fill the gap on the other side. Just this process alone would make it difficult for them to catch their breath. Even if they blocked their bodies with shields, their feet would still be pierced by the arrows that seemed to have grown eyes. As for the god's stone arrows that they hurriedly shot out, not only did they not pose a threat to Andrea, but the god's stone that fell to the ground would also be crushed by Iron Axe, who was acting as a bodyguard. After all, the god's stone was a precious object that was worth dozens of golden dragon coins. If they stopped surrounding the cut-bone warriors, they would lose their advantage in numbers. "Everyone, gather around me." Seeing that they could not go on like this, one of the warriors roared and gathered the remaining dozen or so people around him. At this point in the battle, everyone could see that although Ashes's declaration was extremely arrogant, so far no one had died. If she wanted to kill someone, no one would be able to stop her hammer. Every warrior was a valuable asset to a clan. Her decision had won the respect of all the spectating clans, including the cut-bone duelists. They were not afraid of sacrifice and were willing to give up their lives for the sacred duel. However, it had to be meaningful, not mindless deaths. Mother Earth was not a murderer. She praised courage and strength, but she did not want to see fearless deaths. The warriors sheathed their weapons and lined up in a row. They stretched out their hands in front of them. Their intention was self-evident. Heh! With a relaxed smile, Ashes dropped her wooden shield, raised her long-handled hammer, and rushed toward the crowd. The two forces collided fiercely. "Oh! Come on! Hold on!" There was a cacophony of shouts from the spectator stand, but no clan was mentioned. It was as if the outcome of the duel was no longer important. All people wanted to see was a battle of courage. The spectators, who had been crying a moment ago, now clenched their fists and stared unblinkingly at the center of the high platform. Thuram, however, did not find it strange at all. The drumbeats on the stage were getting louder and louder, like a horn urging the crowd to march forward bravely. Every audience was excited, as if they were not spectators but participants in this sacred duel. At this moment, Ashes's upper body was stretched into a straight line, and her legs were bent forward and backward. She was in a deadlock with the dozen or so cut-bone warriors. The muscles on her arms formed a perfect arc, which was the best interpretation of strength and beauty. However, this was not a duel between one person and the entire clan. When Iron Axe, Andrea, and Drow Silvermoon joined the duel, the balance was broken. The four of them slowly pushed the dozen or so people forward, approaching the edge of the high platform step by step. Every step they took caused a commotion among the spectators. Thuram could not help shouting and waving his arms. After a period of climbing, the music finally reached its climax. The forward footsteps finally merged with the drumbeats. The cut-bone warriors were no longer able to resist. The four of them roared in unison and pushed the dozen or so people behind Iron Axe off the high platform. The music stopped abruptly at the same time, but the stirring aftertaste continued to reverberate in everyone's ears, lingering for a long time. The winner is the Osha clan. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 765. As soon as Gwell's Burnflame approached the training ground of the clan, he heard the bang-bang sounds coming from inside. The noise was so loud that it sounded like a heavy blunt instrument was repeatedly hammering a sandbag. "Sir Chief!" The guard at the door bowed his head and saluted. Is Lorgar practicing?" He pointed to the half-closed door. "Yes, she came early in the morning and said not to disturb her if there's nothing important." "I'll go and have a look." "But, Chief." Gwells glanced at him. "No, please come in." The guard could not help but tremble. It seemed that his daughter was becoming more and more dignified. Gwells was not dissatisfied with the guard's obstruction. Instead, he raised his eyebrows with great interest. In this way, when he could no longer step onto the burning platform, the Wildflame clan would have a new successor. When he opened the door, a training hall made of thousands of cowhides, hemp ropes, and wooden poles appeared in front of him. No one could build such an indoor training ground in Iron Sand City, except for the chief clan with the largest stone castle. The hall was not paved with mud or stone bricks, but with fine yellow sand. Walking on it was like walking in a desert. Although the sand was fine, it was not soft. There were many things hidden in it, most of which were teeth or weapon fragments left behind by trainers. Of course, there was also a lot of blood, so some of the yellow sand had a faint dark red color. Gwell's father's father had said that if they could dye all the yellow sand here red, the Wildflame clan would always be the chief clan, and no one in the southernmost region would be a match for them. Therefore, he had considered that if the clan was defeated and had to leave the stone castle, not only would they have to carry the cowhide tent over their heads, but also the yellow sand. Even if they could not build another training ground like this, at least they would not have to start staining the sand again after they won the first place. At one end of the training hall, there was a row of iron bars. His daughter was barefooted, rolled up her trousers and sleeves, and threw a heavy punch at the hanging sandbags. Gwells had no doubt that if such a punch landed on a human body, it would definitely split the internal organs into pieces. "Well, are you excited after seeing the Osha clan's performance?" he asked with a smile. Lorgar spun her body and swept the sandbag with a roundhouse kick. Her slender legs were as fast as lightning, and the sandbag, which was as tall as a person, was sent flying. The hemp rope, which could not bear the heavy load, finally snapped in the great swaying. The sandbag spun twice and fell heavily on the ground, spilling the sand inside. Phew! She let out a long breath, and her beastified hands gradually returned to normal. "Don't say it, father. You know what I'm thinking. You've taken a fancy to the goddess named Ashes, right?" Gwells laughed out loud. "After all, in terms of one-on-one combat, it's hard to find an opponent who can match you in the whole of Iron Sand City." Lorgar pouted. "It's a pity that they've just won the right to garrison in Iron Sand City. They probably won't be here for a long time. Even if we send them an invitation to a competition, Osha probably won't agree. Of course, as a newly promoted clan, there are still many trivial matters to deal with if they want to gain a foothold in Iron Sand City. I'm afraid that by next spring, they will have new challengers. No one would waste their energy at this time. So I can only chat with the sandbag." Lorgar sighed. "Did you call me just to talk about this? You'd rather chat with the sandbag than talk with father?" Not really. Her ears, which were perked up on the top of her head, trembled and drooped down as if admitting her mistake. Ahem, your expression. Gwels resisted the urge to reach out and stroke his daughter's soft, fluffy ears, and reminded her with a straight face. Although she looked quite cute, it was not suitable for a clan leader to show an expression. As the future leader of the clan, she should always be serious and serious, so that her subordinates would feel reverence and obedience. Lorgar immediately straightened her ears and responded seriously. Gwels nodded in satisfaction. Since his daughter had awakened as a divine lady, she had become more and more fond of fighting, and her strength and ability had become stronger and stronger. In the eyes of the Majins, this was not a bad thing. However, as she grew older, the abilities bestowed by the three gods gradually showed side effects. In the beginning, Lorgar looked no different from an ordinary person. She would only transform into a huge desert wolf when she used her ability. Later, she mastered the skill of transforming individual limbs in battle, and thus gained some means to restrain the god's stone of retaliation. After all, the range of influence of the god's stone was only 2 to 3 steps. She only needed to slightly increase the distance between them to make her arms shapeshift, and ordinary people would not be able to block her slash. This made her invincible in duels. Originally, in order to protect the number 1 position, the samurai team had suffered heavy losses, and their foundation was somewhat unstable. But after she joined, they became incomparably powerful again. In the past 5 years, no one dared to challenge Wild Flame's position. However, the long years of fighting had caused parts of her body to become wolf-like, such as her pointed ears and half-exposed tail. Even if she withdrew her ability, these parts would not change back to their original shape. As a result, Lorgar had become a half-human, half-wolf monster. It was not hard to imagine that she would never be able to live the life of a normal divine lady. At least, no handsome warrior would fall in love with a body like hers, and Lorgar, who was too weak, would never fall in love with her. Perhaps only the father, Gwels, would not care whether his daughter was a human or a beast. Therefore, she had to become the chief of Wild Flame. Only by standing in a position that everyone had to look up to could she cover up these controversies. What do you think of this holy duel? It seemed to make people's blood boil, but in fact, it was just a trick of the chief of Osha, Drow Silvermoon. Apart from ashes, there was nothing special about it. Lorgar wagged her tail. But I have to say, this is really a beautiful move. She used her ability to involve the people outside the duel and avoided the restrictions of the rules. She almost completely controlled the direction of the duel. Gwels said while stroking his beard, "It's been many years since a winner was decided without a single death. I guess that even if the Cutbone clan thought of this, they wouldn't hate Osha." "This trick can only be used once at most," Lorgar said disapprovingly. "I bet that in the next holy duel, the bystanders will also be required to wear God's stones of retaliation. Besides, although Osha's method can win the opponent's respect, it's tantamount to asking for trouble. Respect can't fill one's stomach. After the short period of recuperation, perhaps their first challenger will be the Cutbone clan, who has made a comeback." Gwels patted his daughter's shoulder in relief. Being able to see this and putting the clan's interests as the top priority, she already had the qualifications to be the clan leader. Perhaps she wanted an evenly matched and hearty battle, but she would not deliberately look for such an opportunity and ignore the threat. At this moment, the guard outside the training hall suddenly walked in quickly. After saluting the two, he reported, "Chief, we just received news that the Osha clan has once again issued a request for a holy duel." What? Gwels was startled and could not help but change his expression. It had only been a day since they won the right to enter Iron Sand City. To the 4th-ranked Sandstorm clan. They didn't move from the small oasis to Iron Sand City? Yes, and some people said that they refused the Cutbone clan's arrangement to move out. Damn, what the hell are these people thinking? Could it be that Osha's goal is not simply to enter Iron Sand City? It seems that we've all guessed wrong. Lorgar was silent for a while, then she chuckled. Perhaps the opportunity to fight with ashes isn't as far away as I thought. What do you think, Father? For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 766. After nightfall, the Skull Wine Cup became the liveliest place in the small oasis. I saw the battle between Osha and the Sandstorm clan with my own eyes. A customer drank up his fire lantern wine in one gulp and said loudly, "That black-haired divine lady was unstoppable." As soon as the gong sounded, she rushed to the opponent's divine lady and knocked her out with a shield. Isn't the divine lady of the Sandstorm clan Sandra Sandstorm? She can turn sand into armor and manipulate sand to attack. How could she be defeated in one blow? Someone questioned. Even if she couldn't react in time, the sand armor is usually wrapped around the body in advance. It's even harder than the armor of the Northerners. How can you say that it couldn't block the shield? Why would I lie to you? I wasn't the only one who saw it. The customer shouted unhappily, "The sand armor may be hard, but I didn't see it work at all." The moment the Osha divine lady rushed over, all the sand on her body fell to the ground. She took a heavy blow with her face. You all know how the Osha divine lady withstood more than 10 cut-bone warriors alone in the first duel. With that kind of strength, she was already merciful enough not to be killed on the spot. All the sand fell to the ground. Is she wearing a god stone of retaliation? Maybe, I'm not sure about that. But the duelists of the Cut-Bone and Sandstorm clans must have worn god stones. Maybe this thing doesn't work on her. A divine lady who isn't afraid of god stones. How is that possible? Can you stop interrupting? Someone said unhappily, "Give him another glass of wine and let him continue." Thank you. The customer took a sip of his freshly refilled beer and said, "The Sandstorm clan probably didn't expect their divine lady to be the first to fall. Their formation immediately fell into chaos. They only sent half of their maximum number of people, so the divine lady must be the core of the battle. Once the divine lady fell, there was no suspense about the outcome of the battle." Still no one died? That's right. All 15 of them survived. They were either shot in the shoulder or knee, or knocked out by the divine lady. The crowd immediately started whispering to each other. "But that's nothing," the customer said excitedly. He stood on the bar counter and attracted everyone's attention. The duel the day before yesterday was unforgettable. Osha challenged the Black River clan, a large clan known for their bravery and brutality. You should have heard of the name of Blackwater. Very few duelists can survive if they encounter them. They didn't have a goddess, but all of them were first-rate warriors, and they even sent out a total of 30 people. Compared to the previous 2 matches, this is a completely bloody battle, but silenced the discussion in the tavern. Everyone was waiting for him to finish his sentence. However, not a single person has died on the Land of Scorching Flames high platform. The customer said loudly. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Impossible. I even went to Iron Sand City to do business today. Everyone in the city was talking about the heavy loss of the Black River clan. They even hung a black flag in front of their stone castle. Obviously, they were mourning. But you said that not a single person died? Hey, listen carefully to what I'm saying. The customer waved his finger. What I'm saying is, not a single person died on the duel platform. I can testify to that, someone soon shouted. I was there at the time. That's right. Although I didn't make it to the second round of the holy duel, at least I didn't miss the one the day before yesterday. At that time, it could even be said to be a river of blood. It's incredible that they could do this. Another person echoed. What do you mean? Hurry up and tell us. Maid, give him 3 more cups. In fact, it's easy to understand. It's not that the black-haired divine lady didn't give the Black River clan a chance. But even if they broke their arms or legs, they still wanted to bite off a piece of meat with their teeth. Under such circumstances, she could only make them unable to fight back. The customer deliberately paused here. The divine lady used a long knife to cut off their arms and legs, and then kicked them off the platform one by one. If they broke an arm or a leg, they could still survive if they were bandaged in time. But to break both their arms and legs? It's almost impossible for them to make it back to Iron Sand City. The bleeding alone could kill them. But can you blame the Osha clan? He gulped down a mouthful of wine and asked repeatedly, Do you think it's possible? It can't be. They didn't do this before. They were forced to do it this time. At least they didn't die on the platform. It's enough to prove that the Divine Lady didn't mean to kill them. That's right. In my opinion, the Black River clan deserved it. They didn't know who their opponent was. They thought their desperate appearance could scare the Osha clan. Boss, give everyone a glass of fiery lantern. I'll pay for it. Someone looked at the second floor of the tavern. Thuram, who had been leaning against the window on the second floor, clapped his hands. No need. I'll pay for this round. Everyone gets a glass. To Osha, to Osha. A burst of cheers suddenly broke out downstairs. Thuram drank the wine in his glass in one gulp and let out a long sigh. In the past week, the number of customers visiting the Skull Wine Glass had increased. The originally spacious first floor had become crowded, and there was only one thing people were talking about: the Holy Duel. In fact, not only the tavern but the entire small oasis had become overcrowded. Wherever he went, he could see the dying or half-dead from various clans inquiring about the news of Osha. This was something that would never have happened in the past, because an excessive population would be a great burden to the manager of the oasis. It would consume the little food in the granary, and at the same time, it would easily attract malicious challengers. According to the Watchdog's practice, the small oasis only accepted Sand Nation people who could bring benefits to the oasis, either merchants or warriors who wanted to seek refuge. It was the new Master Drow Silvermoon's order that the clans scattered in every corner of the Silverstream oasis were allowed to gather here. If he was still the old Thuram, his daily work would be to earn some golden dragon for the Watchdog and save some for himself. He would have been more than happy to encounter such a situation. But now his fate was firmly tied with the Osha clan. He was exhausted just letting his subordinates control the order of the small oasis. Fortunately, the new master had also taken this into consideration. After the first duel, Drow left him in the oasis and focused on controlling the situation in the rear. In order to ensure an adequate food supply, Iron Axe not only brought a batch of food from the Cut Bone clan, but also took out Golden Dragon to buy from the other two small oases. The one that refused was swept out by Greycastle's army the next day, and its territory was directly traded to the Silverstream tribe, which had a relatively abundant supply of food. In fact, at this point, he had no idea what the Osha people were planning. They let an unharmed tribe become the challengers, and then let the warriors of the Cut Bone clan and the Sandstorm clan go, so that they could recover their full strength after a short rest. Even if they wanted to be the leader of the clans, it was meaningless to do such a thing. The only thing that comforted Thuram was that the goddesses brought back by Drow Silvermoon were indeed extraordinarily powerful. Every time they fought, there were only 4 of them, and they had defeated 3 clans in a row. Now, there were only 2 clans left standing in their way. Tonight, he would wait for the news from the Land of Fire. Chapter 767. In the middle of the night, a messenger ran into the tavern, panting. "We won! We won!" He shouted in a hoarse voice, not bothering to take a sip of wine. "Sir, the Osha clan won." It would take about a day to return to the small oasis from the Land of Fire on foot. If 2 horses were exchanged, they could arrive on the same day. Obviously, as soon as the winner was decided, he hurried back to the oasis without stopping. The whole Skullwine Cup was in an uproar. I knew they would win. What about the process? Tell us, how did they win? Was there still no casualties? Everyone's questions instantly surrounded the messenger. The high-quality fruit wine passed through the layers of people and was delivered to him with tacit understanding. Thuram also felt relieved. No matter what, the stronger Osha was, the more comfortable his life would be as a member of the clan. Although he did not do it with his own ability, but so what? It was not a heavy price to pay for taking his clansmen away from the status of half-dead and dead and moved to Iron Sand City. He clapped his hands at the clansmen. "Take a breather first, then tell everyone what happened in the duel." "Yes." The messenger moistened his throat with the fruit wine, took a deep breath, and said, "Both sides did not fight. The Wild Wave clan and the Osha princess reached an agreement and voluntarily gave up the second position. The tavern was quiet for a while, then burst into a heated discussion, as if the roof was going to be overturned. The two sides didn't fight? Voluntarily gave up. Is this a surrender? Doesn't that mean that Osha is only one step away from becoming the leader of the clans? Completing 4 holy duels in a row without killing a single person is something that has never happened before. I also heard the news and rushed over. Just like me. If it wasn't so sensational, who would want to leave the Silver Stream Oasis in such a cold winter? Damn, I didn't come in vain. A toast to the 3 gods of Osha. To Lord Drow Silvermoon. Thuram was also stunned for a while, but he was not surprised by the news that the Wild Wave clan had taken the initiative to retreat. It was easy to understand why they would temporarily stay in the 3rd place to preserve their strength. When Osha and Wild Flame fought each other badly, they would then look for an opportunity to return to the 2nd place. It was even possible that they would covet the position of the 1st clan. After all, if they could retreat, it would be difficult for Wild Flame to do so. What shocked him was that the discussion in the crowd made him vaguely understand the purpose of his new master. That group of people was quickly accumulating reputation. There had never been a holy duel that attracted the attention of so many Sand Nation people, the revenge of the Osha princess, the storm-like continuous challenges, no matter how many opponents there were. They always fought with 4 people, and the legendary battle record of not killing a single person. All of this seemed so incredible, and at the same time, it aroused people's curiosity to the greatest extent. Although the Holy Duel was an important ceremony that determined the status and rights of the big clans, it was still a very distant thing for most of the Sand Nation. Some clans had never left the Silver Stream Oasis from their establishment to their demise, so naturally they would not care about the battle between the Challenger and the big clans. After all, there were always very few clans that could stand out from the numerous clans. A normal succession of power was not even as attractive as the news that Osha had been framed by Iron Whip. However, this time was different. A clan that had once been exiled and the daughter of the chief had been sold as a slave could still usher in an opportunity to make a comeback. This alone made most of the weaker clans unconsciously stand on the side of Osha. What happened after that was even more bizarre. Within a short span of a month, Osha had transformed from an unknown challenger to the center of discussion among the Sand Nation. The densely packed heads in the tavern were the best proof of that. Whether they held expectations or ridicule, or simply wanted to see how far Osha could go, at least Drow Silvermoon had become a household name. It was conceivable that when the last holy duel came, many people would go to the Land of Fire to witness Osha's battle to the top. Of course, Thuram understood what such a reputation meant. The previous clan leader who had spread his name throughout the southernmost region had almost unified the entire desert. Although he had fallen in the war with Grey Castle, he had already vaguely assumed the posture of an emissary of the 3 gods. Was this also the purpose of the new master? The only difference was that this time Osha no longer had to fight against Grey Castle. The power behind them was the northern kingdom that suppressed the Sand Nation. His Majesty Roland Wimbledon will bring an oasis and order to the Majin clan. Thinking of what Iron Axe had said, he suddenly realized that when Osha really became the leader of the clans, something earth-shaking might happen. That might change the fate of the entire Sand Nation of the Majin clan. 2 days later, in the outskirts of the small oasis, at the camp of the First Army. Your injury, is there no problem? Queen looked at Ashes worriedly. The battle with the Blackwater clan had left her covered in blood. Although most of the blood was from her opponent, she was not unscathed. Don't worry, it won't affect the next operation. Ashes carelessly untied her long ponytail. Her black hair cascaded down like a waterfall. Coupled with her loose robe, she did not look like a soldier who had experienced many life-and-death situations. Instead, she looked more like a graceful and peerless beauty. Leaf's herbs are also very effective. Most of the deeper wounds have already scabbed. They're just superficial wounds. An extraordinary's physique is better than ours. After all, nutrition doesn't need to be supplied to the brain, muscles grow very fast, and skin is especially thick. Andrea shrugged. You don't know what she went through when she hunted the church alone. She hid in a place where even rats wouldn't want to stay. She lived on rotting animal carcasses. She didn't die even then, not to mention such a small wound. Ashes rolled her eyes and did not argue with her as usual. Instead, she leaned on the recliner and closed her eyes to rest. This is what a mature soldier should do, Iron Axe thought. Apart from eating and fighting, the rest of the time should be used to rest, recover as much as possible, and face the next challenge with full spirit. The other witches in Neverwinter may also be strong, but only a few can do this. No wonder His Majesty delayed the plan to wait for the candidate. What should we do next? Echo asked. We've done our best according to His Majesty's instructions. Iron Axe recalled Roland's instructions before they left. Although some of the words were very difficult to pronounce, such as hype is the most important, create a topic as much as possible, create a legend of the duel, let the whole desert hear your voice, and so on. In short, it was to attract as much attention as possible. Now that there were more and more people coming from various Silverstream oases to watch the holy duel, this requirement should be met. What's left is to defeat Wildflame, and then you can say His Majesty's words in front of everyone in the Holy Land. I understand. Echo was silent for a moment, then clenched her fists as if to cheer herself up. Don't worry, Lady Silvermoon. His Majesty doesn't require everyone to understand this immediately, so you don't need to feel too much pressure. Iron Axe comforted her. Just spread your voice throughout the Land of Fire as usual. No matter how many people respond to us, the new order will eventually spread through the Silverstream to the entire southernmost region. Just then, Thurum opened the door and walked in. After saluting the four of them in turn, he took out a letter. The Wildflame clan has responded to Osha's challenge request, but they require a designated person to participate in the duel. What do you mean? Andrea frowned. Chapter 768. The holy duel between the Osha clan and the Wildflame clan began as scheduled. The Land of Fire had never been as lively as it was today. People who came on foot to watch the duel almost surrounded the high platform. In order to attract as many people as possible to enter the Holy Land and to ensure the publicity effect, Iron Axe rented a box of God's Stones of Retaliation. As long as the number of people in a clan did not exceed 50, the other big clans would have nothing to say. Moreover, they could not stop it even if they wanted to. The Osha clan was now the second most famous clan. As long as it did not violate the law set by the three gods, every word of the Osha clan carried great weight and every request should be fully considered. Ashes slowly walked onto the high platform and was immediately welcomed by the cheers of the crowd. The Irons and people of the Majin clan were always full of respect for true warriors, and her performance in the past half a month was enough to win everyone's respect. Some people even called her the strongest fighter in the Northern Kingdom. Therefore, this duel had become a contest between the strongest in the Northern Kingdom and the strongest in the southernmost region. Ashes was dressed as usual. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail, hanging down to her waist. She was wearing a black robe, neither was she wearing armor, nor was she carrying any weapons. She did not mean to be arrogant. One of the requirements of the Wildflame clan was to fight naked. Thurum explained that this did not mean fighting naked, but did not mean carrying any weapons, armor or auxiliary items, including the God's Stone of Retaliation. Obviously, this made up for the lack of ability of the goddess to a certain extent, and at the same time, inadvertently weakened the fighting strength of the extraordinary. Inadvertently, Ashes found that through this month's understanding, they did not know the classification of witches' abilities. All awakened witches were regarded as goddesses, and they did not know the existence of the most special type of witches, the existence of the extraordinary. Probably the other side just wanted to have a good fight. In the end, she agreed to this request because she considered that the ability of the princess of the Wildflame clan was also of the hand-to-hand type. In addition to Thurum's description, this was confirmed by the information collected from various channels. The ability of the strongest goddess in the southernmost region, Lorgar, was similar to that of Maggie. She could transform into a giant beast and obtain strength and agility far beyond that of ordinary people. This made her very interested. Was the witch or the extraordinaire stronger after the transformation? If it was an opponent like Anna, Ashes would never agree. The unpredictable black fire could be used for both offense and defense. It was impossible to guard against it. Without the protection of the god's stone, it was impossible to get within 10 steps of the black fire. In addition, an evenly matched battle was also beneficial to her. Ever since Ashes knew about the realm beyond transcendence, she had always wanted to improve her abilities. According to Agatha, if one wanted to become a transcendent, in addition to training hard day after day, they would also have to constantly fight against strong enemies. They would also have to have an epiphany between life and death to welcome a higher level of advancement. This was also the main reason why she agreed to the other party's request. At this moment, a deafening cry suddenly erupted from the crowd. A woman wearing a hooded cloak lightly leaped onto the platform and walked in front of Ashes. It seemed that the people of the Sand Nation had more respect for their clansmen. Without a doubt, she was the opponent he had to face today, the divine lady of the Wild Flame clan, Lorgar. "You are Ashes?" She took off her hood, revealing a head of reddish-brown curly hair and a pair of furry ears that were raised high. Ashes was stunned. "Are these dog ears?" "They're wolves." Lorgar corrected her, her face a little flushed. "Oh, don't you wear shoes? The ground should be very hot, right?" She lowered her eyes and glanced at the other party's bare feet. The Majins are never afraid of hot sand. She took turns standing on her tiptoes and took off her cloak at the same time, revealing her fluffy tail behind her. Judging from her expression, it's obviously very hot. Ashes shrugged. Maintaining the form all the time to adapt to the consumption of magic power? That's a good way to practice. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lorgar swayed her tail. "This is the price of the ability granted by the three gods, not a way to practice. I can't restore my human form, so I can only live in a half-human, half-beast form." "So that's how it is," Ashes suddenly realized. It was because she didn't want to expose her appearance, that's why she wore a cloak in such a hot place. And after getting on the stage and showing her beast form, it would make people misunderstand that she had entered a state of battle. It seemed that the giant beast mentioned in the intelligence was a giant wolf. She just didn't know if using bones to lure her would cause her to instantly change her target, thus greatly reducing her combat power. At least for Maggie, this method was very effective. "What are you laughing at?" She frowned. "Are you looking down on me?" "No, nothing." Ashes suppressed the smile on her face. "I just thought of an interesting friend. Since you're ready, let's start." "That's what I was thinking." Lorgar raised her hands, and the smooth arms that originally belonged to a woman suddenly swelled up and instantly turned into a pair of thick wolf claws. "Father, please sound the gong. This is partial beastification at will?" Ashes raised her eyebrows. It seemed that although she knew nothing about the mystery of magic power, she still followed her instinct and mastered the way to use magic power. This was difficult even for Maggie, and she only showed it in an emergency. As the chief of Wild Flame hit the gong hard, Lorgar stomped on the ground and rushed toward her. Although the wolf girl was very fast, in the eyes of Ashes, she was not much different from an ordinary person. Ashes could even judge the opponent's next step and occupy a position in advance to attack first. But she didn't do so. Lorgar obviously didn't use her full strength, but intended to use this form to test her strength first. Ashes intended to use a head-on method to let the opponent understand that there was no chance of defeating her without transforming into a complete form. She stretched out her hands and grabbed the wolf girl's claws like iron pincers. Then she twisted her body, lifted the wolf girl over her shoulder, and smashed her hard on the ground with the momentum of the opponent. This was the advantage of transcendence. If partial beastification only had great power in the corresponding body part, then every finger and every tendon of hers was always maintained in the strongest state. The magic power strengthened the body day after day, never stopping. She could feel the surging power in her body at any time. With a punch, the place where Lorgar was lying was smashed to pieces. The latter used a roll to avoid it, and then with both hands on the ground, she stood upside down and bent her legs to kick at her. The kick that could break the internal organs of an adult was caught by Ashes with one hand, and at the same time, she tightened her grip. The skin on Lorger's calf was suddenly torn, and it was about to be broken. At this moment, the wolf girl also realized that the situation was not good. She endured the pain and lifted her other leg to sweep at Wendy's head. Halfway through the kick, it changed into a wolf's leg as thick as a waist. Ashes loosened her 5 fingers and lowered her head to avoid the sweep. Lorger, who had struggled to break free, didn't dare to try again. She transformed her right leg, which had 5 bloodstains, into a wolf's leg. In this way, her limbs had been completely beastified. Not only did she grow a lot taller, but her speed and strength had also been greatly improved. Unfortunately, for Ashes, the wolf girl situation was not much better. Any part of her body that was not beastified was her obvious weakness. For example, her head and abdomen. The extraordinary swung her fists, forcing Lorger to raise her claws to parry. Then she grinned, and before the wolf girl could react, she slammed her forehead into Lorger's face. Woo! Princess Lorger couldn't help but let out a cry of pain. Tears and blood splashed out at the same time. The huge impact broke her nose, and the intense pain forced her to close her eyes. Chapter 769. The noise on the field suddenly quieted down. No one expected that Lorger would fall into a disadvantageous position in just a few seconds. Judging from the muffled sound of the kick, the third princess of the Wild Flame clan was definitely badly injured. Only Ashes knew that she did not use her full strength in her straight kick, and at the moment of hitting the wolf girl, the other party had already kicked back at full speed and slightly curled up her body at the same time, so the blow was not completely absorbed. When the face suffered a heavy blow, she was still able to consciously withdraw from the enemy's attack range, indicating that even if Lorger had not experienced a real life and death battle, at least she had put in enough hard work and training. After the girl fell to the ground and rolled twice, her body suddenly swelled up. The clothes on her body were torn to pieces, and what was revealed was no longer her smooth skin, but a fluffy light yellow mane. Well, it looked different from Maggie, Ashes thought. If the fat pigeon wrapped itself in hair and then transformed into a bird, then this was a pure physical change. It was no wonder that she chose to fight barefoot before. If she had to break a pair of shoes every time she shape-shifted, even the big clans would have a headache. In contrast, Maggie was much more economical. Not only did she not damage her clothes, but she could also roll the package on her body into her hair. Most of the time, it was equivalent to carrying an extra luggage. Ow 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 ow. When Lorger stopped rolling on the ground, her body had changed into a completely different appearance. A huge desert wolf appeared on the high platform. Ashes had seen these wolves with yellow fur on her way to and from the Land of Fire. Compared with the snow wolves in the western region, their fur was not only thick and hard, but also thinner. After sunset, their eyes would occasionally emit a green light, and they always looked hungry. Obviously, their lives were far less than those in the concealing forest. In addition to not having rich food, they had to face the threat of other fierce predators. But the wolf in front of her was too big. Even a horse would be dwarfed by her. Just by standing on all fours, she was half a head taller than Ashes. If Lorger stood up on her hind legs, she would probably be as tall as 2 adult men. And her seriously injured nose was also reflected in her shape-shifted body. The middle of the raised nose bridge collapsed, and in addition to hot air, there was a trace of blood. Lorger raised her head and let out a long howl, causing the onlookers of the Sand Nation to gasp. Ashes was not the only one who was shocked. It was probably the first time for most of the people present to witness the complete transformation process of the strongest goddess of the southernmost region at such a close distance. It was normal for them to feel great pressure and fear when standing under such a burly wolf body. Without waiting for the sound of breathing to subside, the wolf girl dashed forward and pounced on Ashes again. This time, Ash's expression became much more serious. Her opponent's speed was already comparable to that of a god's punishment warrior. Furthermore, with such a huge body, her strength must not be underestimated. She dodged to one side to avoid Lorger's attack, and immediately realized that something was wrong. That was, after shapeshifting, the wolf's attack range was too large. Compared with the god's punishment army, which was no different from ordinary people, she often only needed to move one step to dodge, and 2 or 3 steps could put her in a favorable position to fight back. But for a giant beast, this number of steps had to be increased by at least several times. Just like now, after Ashes dodged the attack, the wolf swept her right claw, which smashed toward her like a wall. Bang! Unable to dodge, she could only raise her arms and block the opponent's attack head-on. Although the force of the collision was exactly the same, the advantage of the body size showed at this moment. Lorger just trembled, but Ashes had already flown backward. Under the high platform, Echo could not help but grab Andrea's wrist. Is Ashes all right? Since transforming into a giant beast, the situation had been reversed. The princess of the Wild Flame clan had been suppressing Ashes and chasing her. The latter could only use most of her energy to defend and dodge, and could hardly fight back. Although both of them were bare-handed, at this level, each of their punches and kicks was no different from a hammer or a sharp blade. Several wounds appeared on Ash's body, and the blood gradually dyed her robe red. Don't worry, this level of attack won't kill her. She hasn't used her full strength yet, Andrea said indifferently. Andrea said nonchalantly, Ashes doesn't have any other strong points, but her ability to withstand attacks is top-notch. She hasn't used all her strength? Echo was startled. But she's obviously panting heavily, and she doesn't look relaxed. Do you know the extraordinary training method of the Tequila era? Andrea asked. What's that? A method used to speed up the consumption of magic power, so that one is always in a state of training. According to His Majesty, it's ancient and inefficient. If one has the time, one might as well read a few books and study how muscles and bones convert chemical energy into mechanical energy. She chuckled. But I think with Ashes's brain, she may be particularly suitable for this stupid method. After all, asking her to read books is simply making things difficult for her. Is that so? Echo's mouth opened wide. Of course, Andrea elegantly stroked the ends of her hair. Look, she's going to fight back. Taking advantage of the distance between her and her opponent, Ashes reached into her arms and took out a black cloth belt. What's that? Lorger stopped and growled. A weapon? There was also a commotion in the crowd. The agreement reached before the holy duel was recognized by the 3 gods, and those who broke it would be despised for eternity. Therefore, even if no one checked, no one would break it. Ashes smiled and casually threw the cloth belt on the ground. It looked like a belt that was tied around her waist, but when it fell to the ground, it unexpectedly made a dull sound, as if what she had thrown down was not a soft cloth, but a piece of heavy iron and stone. The wolf girl's pupils suddenly contracted. However, this was not the only thing that she carried. Then she squatted down and took off the 2 pieces of black cloth tied to her ankles. They looked ordinary, but they were made by Soroya herself. If they were made of ordinary cloth, even the strongest canvas, they would not last a week. The cloth belt was divided into 3 layers. The innermost layer was hollow and filled with specially made iron bars. A short section weighed more than 10 kilograms. For example, the one around the waist. It was equivalent to carrying an adult on one's back when moving. When she stood up again, she felt full of strength and a long-lost sense of relaxation returned to her body. Transcendence wore these things to practice. The faster the magic was consumed, the more thorough the strengthening of the body. Ashes still remembered what Agatha said at that time. Many people even brought them to the battlefield. At the most critical moment, people could always burst out with unimaginable power. If everything went well, as long as you could persist for 5 to 6 years, you would have the hope of breaking through the shackles of the body and becoming a transcendent. Chapter 770. This was the first time that Ashes had taken the initiative to attack since the 3rd princess of the Wild Flame clan had completely transformed. Lorger did not flinch either. She lifted her body and pounced on her opponent. But this time, she found that her pursuit could no longer be coherent. It was difficult to force her opponent to block with a wide sweep. It was as if she was always a beat slower. She could have been hit by Ash's attack before, but she could only tear off a piece of her clothes. And most of the time, she could not touch anything. After fighting for a while, Wolf Girl had to use the same trick again. After her right claw attack failed, she used her remaining strength to spin her body and swat her opponent with her thick tail. This kind of move allowed her to instantly attack half of the platform. No matter how fast she was, it was impossible to retreat unscathed unless her opponent had no intention of getting close to her in the first place. Her iron whip-like tail could easily scrape off flesh and blood. Most of the wounds on Ash's body were caused by this move. However, the expected impact did not come. There was a cry of surprise from the audience. Oh no! Lorgar suddenly had a bad feeling in her heart. At the same time, she caught a figure falling from the sky from the corner of her eye. She flew up? All the onlookers widened their eyes. They saw Ashes jump up and jump over Wolf Girl, who was half a head taller than her. She landed right on Wolf Girl's head that had turned around. No matter how large the attack range of a tail was, it could only sweep close to the ground. It was no threat to the target in midair. However, it was extremely difficult for an average person to jump such a high distance. In addition, once the body left the ground, it was easy for the opponent to judge the landing point, making the following attack unavoidable. Therefore, few people would jump at will in a duel. Unfortunately, after Wolf Girl turned her body and swept, her tail became her blind spot. Ashes did not choose to show mercy anymore. She punched Lorgar's eye socket, and the eyeball, which was as big as a bowl, immediately burst open. Blood splattered all over Lorgar's upper body, and the intense and unbearable pain made Lorgar let out a hoarse scream. No matter how tough her body was to take a beating, organs like the eyes were still extremely fragile. After losing an eye, the balance of the duel quickly tilted in favor of the extraordinaire. However, just as Ashes was about to withdraw and give her opponent a chance to surrender, she found that Lorgar had closed her eyes fiercely. Her upper and lower eyelids, as well as the muscles of her face, were tightly clamping her right hand. At the same time, a giant claw slapped at her like lightning. There was no doubt that if this claw hit her, it would aggravate the injury to the Wolf Girl's eyes. His opponent had clearly displayed his will to fight. Normally, this level of imprisonment would not be able to trap an extraordinary. At most, it would slow her down a little, but at such a critical moment, even a breath's delay would be fatal. Ashes knew that she could not avoid it, so she did not hesitate to raise her other arm and take the hit. The huge impact made her seem to hear the sound of her own bones breaking. She spat out a mouthful of blood. This was probably the first time she had been hit since the duel began. When the two separated, Ashes noticed that her left arm had been folded into a strange shape. Roar! Lorgar roared and opened her mouth to bite her. Ashes did not move forward but retreated. She rolled forward, avoided the bite, and drilled into the dead angle below the Wolf Girl's neck. Then she supported herself with one hand and kicked her opponent's forelimbs with both feet. With a loud bang, the door-like forelimbs folded outward. At this point, the Wolf Girl, who only had 3 legs left, had almost lost the ability to attack quickly. Lorgar, enough! Gwels, the chief of the Wild Flame tribe, shouted anxiously. No, I can still fight. Lorgar replied, panting. Her condition is not much better. Just hold on for a little longer. Just hold on for a little longer. Ashes licked the blood at the corner of her mouth and could not help but laugh. The other party's guess was right. Her condition was not very good. The heavy blow just now had made her sore all over, and her internal organs seemed to have shifted positions. One of her arms was also broken, and it hung weakly by her side. She looked as pathetic as the one-eyed wolf standing on 3 legs. However, humans could move on 2 legs, but wolves could not. Plus, losing an eye would further hinder the Wolf Girl's movements. If she could not hit the enemy, no matter how powerful she was, it would be meaningless. This was the experience she had gained from fighting with Scourge. Another thing that could be confirmed was that she was much stronger than she was a year ago. This was especially obvious when she was facing the heavy palm. Ashes could clearly feel the magic in her body flowing faster than ever before. Time seemed to slow down in an instant. She could even see the claws and pads of her opponent approaching. Most of the magic was concentrated in the front of her arm, giving her unprecedented strength. In the past, she was afraid that this blow would not only break her blocking arm, but also crack her ribs and internal organs. But now, she only felt pain, not numbness and weakness. Was this the feeling of life and death that Agatha had mentioned? She faintly felt that she was standing in front of a heavy door. If the she-wolf could partially animate her body by controlling her magic, could the extraordinaires use the same method to make every attack surpass their own limits? This might be a direction worth practicing. Of course, the most important thing now was to solve this duel. If her other eye was also broken, she would have no choice but to admit defeat, right? Anyway, with Leaf's herbs, it was not difficult to keep her alive. As long as she dragged her back to the western region, Nana's healing spell could restore her to her original state. Ashes took a deep breath and bent down slightly. Lorgar also put on a forward posture and showed her fangs at the same time. Both of them knew that the next blow would be the last fight between the two sides. No matter the result, only one person could stand on the high platform. The solemn atmosphere infected all the bystanders. The scene was silent, only the sound of the burning ground fire could be heard. Just as Ashes was about to step forward, Echo suddenly screamed behind her. "Be careful above you!" She suddenly raised her head and saw a huge monster swooping down. Its spread wings were almost wider than the high platform. Its claws were like open sharp blades, and each claw was as thick as an arm. It was not until it was close to the ground that the hissing sound of the airflow passing over the wings reached her ears. Ashes used her greatest strength to jump to the side, out of the monster's diving attack range. She saw from the corner of her eyes that Lorgar also wanted to dodge, but because of her broken forelimbs, she could not exert force. Her body tilted, and the enemy pounced on her. With a loud bang, the high platform was smashed by this meteor-like impact, leaving several cracks. Chapter 771. Three Gods Above. That's a four-winged eagle. This beast dares to break into the holy land of scorching fire. Help, help! Guards, guards, where are the guards? There were panicked and incredulous cries from the crowd. Some Sand Nation people pulled out their weapons and climbed onto the platform to save Lorgar, while others wanted to escape. The scene became chaotic for a while. Ashes, on the other hand, had seen it clearly. The big bird that had revealed its true form from the smoke was actually a giant demonic beast. It looked like a hybrid between an eagle and a beetle. Its back, lower abdomen, and head were all covered with striped carapaces. It had 6 claws, each of which was clearly segmented. The front pair was the thickest and held Lorgar firmly to the ground like a pair of iron pincers. Its 4 pairs of wings, which should have been as thin as cicada wings, had turned into thick feathers, which was also its most striking feature. It was absolutely impossible for such an ugly monster to be bred in a natural environment. The demonic beast pressed the wolf girl down and pecked at her head. The latter's claws could not be blocked at all, and she could only move her head left and right to avoid the attack. Her immobile body limited her dodging range. In just a few breaths, the wolf girl's cheeks were hit several times. Blood gushed into her body and dyed her fur red. If this went on, she would be killed by the demonic beasts in no time. Ashes naturally would not allow such a thing to happen. She assisted Iron Axe in the desert operation for Tilly's sake. Using the holy duel to decide the winner was also because of Iron Axe's choice. Coupled with Leaf's herbs and Nana's treatment, she had to deal with it seriously and respond to Iron Axe's expectations. But Lorgar was still a witch. As long as she did not do evil things like the pure witches, she could not sit back and watch her own kind die in the hands of demonic beasts. Echo! Ashes shouted and then rushed towards the hybrid. Taking advantage of the time when it was about to peck again, she hugged its long curved beak. The sharp corners of its mouth cut her arm and blood dripped on the wolf girl's face, but she still did not move. The wolf girl raised her head weakly and looked at her with her remaining eye. There was a complicated look in her dark pupils. At the same time, Hui's soothing melody rang out just at the right time. The spirited melody gradually dispersed the people's panic, and the crowd that was pushing and shoving each other also eased up. Without the interference of the crowd, a series of gunshots came from the direction where Andrea was standing. Unlike the First Army, which was worried about accidentally injuring the witches, her accurate shooting ensured that as long as there was a gap, she would be able to hit the target perfectly. Ashes clearly saw the claw that was pressing down on Lorgar shake violently. Several bullets hit the same joint, directly breaking the four-winged eagle's insect claw into two. After losing the clamp, Lorgar turned over and kicked the demonic beast's abdomen, sending it flying. The latter flapped its wings and soared into the sky again. Only now did the First Army squad start firing intensively. Unfortunately, it was not so easy to hit a flying target that could nimbly hover or undulate up and down. Rather than saying that it flew like a bird, it was more like an erratic insect. "Are you okay?" Ashes took off her black robe and covered the rapidly shrinking body of the giant wolf. "For the time being, I won't die." Lorgar, who had returned to her human form, coughed out 2 mouthfuls of blood and struggled to sit up. She tried several times but failed. "Don't move. It will worsen your wound." Ashes searched her body and found that one side of her chest was sunken and she could feel the protruding bones. Apparently, several of her ribs had been broken in the previous violent impact. Fortunately, the giant wolf form was more resistant to beatings. If she had been in her human form, she would probably have died. The warriors of the Wild Flame clan also surrounded her. They held short bows and shot arrows at the demonic beast hovering in the sky. However, guns could not effectively threaten it, let alone arrows. "Be careful. It's coming again." Hui's warning sounded again. "Get out of the way." Ashes held Lorgar and rolled on the ground to avoid the demonic beast's sweeping attack. Several warriors of the clan who could not dodge in time were knocked into the air. A large part of their chests was dented and it seemed that they would not survive. The four-winged eagle obviously had high intelligence. It seemed to realize that the only thing that could hurt it was the spear in Andrea's hand. When it swooped down to attack Lorgar, it tried to face the blonde witch with its abdominal armor. It swayed left and right and flew in a zigzag line. When Andrea reloaded, the demonic beast would throw the captured people at Hummingbird and Huiin beside her to hinder her reloading action. At the same time, the demonic beast would change its direction to attack her. Andrea dodged several times, but she was surrounded by danger. After all, in addition to paying attention to the movement of the demonic beast, she also had to take care of her other 2 companions. If she had not mastered a new evolved skill that could burst out a strong airflow at close range, the demonic beast would have already pounced on her. Ashes could not help but frown. No matter how she looked at it, this four-winged eagle seemed to be specifically targeting the witches. If it was purely for hunting, there were people everywhere around the platform. No one would be able to stop it from randomly grabbing 1 or 2 people and taking them away. However, it repeatedly swooped down, either to attack Lorgar or to stare at Andrea and the others. It almost turned a blind eye to ordinary people, which was completely different from the rumors of its brutality and bloodthirstiness. There were only 50 people in the First Army who entered the Land of Fire, so they had no way to deal with a flexible target in the air. Ashes thought that she had to lead it to the top of the army and use more intensive shooting to have a chance of shooting it down. But how exactly should she do it? At this moment, Lorgar grabbed her hand. "Throw me up," the wolf girl gasped and said word by word. "What?" "Throw me up," she repeated. "When it's coming for us, this is the only chance to catch it. I can't move on my own, so I can only rely on you." "If you don't succeed, you may die here," Ashes said in a low voice. "The best ending for a warrior is always to die on the battlefield." Lorgar's ears drooped down. "In this way, at least I persisted until the last moment. You're the most powerful warrior I've ever met. Thank you for letting me experience such a wonderful duel." Ashes saw the determination in her expression. After a moment of silence, she nodded and said, "I understand. But you're wrong about one thing. This is not our last battle." Even if I survive, I won't be able to stand like a normal person again. You don't have to comfort me. She laughed at herself. With such an injury, even if she recovered, she would still be disabled. For her, this might be worse than death. In the city of Neverwinter in Grey Castle, there's a witch called Nana. Ashes slightly grinned. She has the ability to heal any injury. Even if you're on the verge of death, or if your hands and feet are all broken, she can still restore the injury to its original state. The wolf's ears stood up in the blink of an eye. Well, you said, is it true? Of course. I've experienced more than 100 battles like this, and there are even more powerful enemies there. If you want to hone your skills, you can find an opportunity at any time. So as long as you survive. Ashes paused here. There was no need to elaborate on the latter half of her words. She saw the wolf's remaining eye emit a new brilliance. I'll survive. I'll definitely survive. Well then let's go. Ashes no longer hesitated. She grabbed one of Lorger's feet with one hand and took advantage of the four-winged eagle rushing toward the center of the platform. She spun around with herself as the center and then threw Lorger out. Chapter 772. Hiss 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 hiss. The four-winged eagle let out a strange high-pitched cry, probably not expecting the other party to take the initiative to attack it. It couldn't wait to open its beak, not dodging, and directly bit Lorger. Then, everyone saw this shocking scene. Lorger instantly transformed into a huge desert wolf and slapped the strange bird hard in the face. The force of the slap was like a muffled thunder. The eagle's head tilted to one side, and its curved beak, which was big enough to pick up an adult, suddenly changed shape. The front half of its beak even broke and flew away. At this time, it was too late for the hybrid to adjust its posture, and the two giant beasts fiercely crashed into each other. Lorger spat out a mouthful of blood again, but her 3 feet firmly held on to the other party, and her sharp teeth fiercely bit into the demonic beast's flesh. Suddenly feeling a weight on its body, the demonic beast obviously realized that the situation was not good and desperately flapped its wings, trying to regain its altitude. But to fly while carrying a wolf girl as heavy as itself was undoubtedly far beyond its ability. No matter how hard it flapped its wings, the two giant beasts kept falling. Andrea! Ashes shouted to her companion. I knew you'd have to rely on me to end this. Andrea threw the rifle to Echo, jumped to the platform with the help of running, and summoned her magic longbow at the same time. At this time, the wolf and the bird also fell heavily on the platform. With a flash of white light, the desert wolf on the four-winged eagle suddenly disappeared without a trace. Ashes knew that Lorger had either exhausted her magic power or lost consciousness. But being able to do this, the outcome was already a foregone conclusion. She directly tore off the outer robe of a dead Sand Nation warrior and rushed toward the demonic beast. When she got closer, she noticed that there were many scattered wounds on the carapace of the demonic beast's back and abdomen. Some were abrasions and some were small holes, from which green mucus and blue blood flowed out. These wounds were probably left by the First Army, but none of them could cause fatal damage to the demonic beast. Ashes found the motionless third princess, who was stuck in the gap between the wings, and carried her down the platform. From the corner of her eye, she saw that the longbow in Andrea's hand was already releasing a dazzling golden light. The demonic hybrid shook its head and staggered to get up from the ground, only to find that there seemed to be a golden sun shining beside it. Hey, where are you looking at? Andrea sneered. Fly again. Only then did it come back to its senses. It spread its wings in panic, wanting to escape, but it was too late. A ball of dazzling light shot out from the magic bow and entered the demonic beast's body with a thunderous roar. In an instant, countless rays of golden light emerged from the demonic beast's body, like a blazing sun breaking out of its shell, engulfing the demonic beast in its brilliance. When the rumbling sound faded, a several meters wide circular opening appeared in the center of the high platform. Only a small part of the tall and sturdy four-winged eagle's torso was left lying at the edge of the opening. Flesh scattered everywhere like raindrops. And in this rain of flesh and blood, Andrea stood proudly, the flowing golden bowstring reflecting a dazzling brilliance against her long hair. Why are you still holding onto the longbow? Are you wasting your mana? Ashes, who was in the audience, stood up in annoyance. Of course, to let the people here remember my powerful appearance. Ah, bah. She suddenly covered her mouth halfway. It's all your fault for luring me to talk. What if the flesh fell into my mouth? Other than rolling her eyes, Ashes could not think of any other expression. Wells, the patriarch of the Wild Flame tribe, took his daughter from Ash's hands with a heavy expression. His shoulders slightly trembled as he said, Lorger, she's still alive, but the situation is not optimistic. With this kind of injury, even the best herbs can only delay her death. Ashes shrugged. Unless she can be treated immediately. You have a way to cure her? Yes, and it can be as good as before the duel. Wells opened his eyes wide in disbelief. After staring at the extraordinary for a while, he slowly opened his mouth and said, Then, what's the price? You'll know soon enough. Ashes spread out her hands. But what I want to ask is, do you recognize the result of the holy duel? Wild Flame isn't an iron whip. We won't deny the victory that was won with blood and honor. Wells let out a long sigh. At this point, no one can deny the title of the chief of the clan. If you don't believe me, listen. Of course, Ashes had heard it. Whether it was under the high platform or on the path of fire, as long as there were people standing, they would shout a name in unison. Osha! 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 Amid the cheers of the crowd, Echo stepped onto the duel platform. I'm the chief of the Osha clan, Drow Silvermoon. But I also have another name, Echo of the Grey Castle Witch Union. Her voice drowned out all the noise and clearly reached everyone's ears. Ever since I was framed by the Iron Whip clan, I lost everything. Not only were my clansmen exiled, but I was also sold as a slave from the port of Clearwater all the way to the king's city of Grey Castle. There, I was lucky enough to be rescued by a witch organization. Then, I went to a small town in the western region and changed my name to Echo. She paused and then continued, Compared to Drow Silvermoon, I prefer this name. Although I've gone through a lot of suffering, I've gained much more happiness than I did in the desert. It was once an inconspicuous border town, but now it had become a bustling and wealthy city. Most of the changes during this period were brought about by a lord. He is Roland Wimbledon, His Majesty the King of Grey Castle. He is also the one who ultimately changed my fate. Ashes was stunned. This doesn't seem to be what she said during the rehearsal. Yes. Andrea chuckled. But it should be what she wants to say the most. No matter what, we just need to applaud her from below. At first, Echo seemed a little nervous, but after talking about her experiences and interesting life in Neverwinter, she became more and more relaxed. I know you're all curious why I'm saying this. After all, that's the territory of the Northerners. No matter how beautiful it is, it has nothing to do with us Sand Nation. That's right, maybe it used to be like this, but now it's different. Chapter 773. Great Chief, what's that? It sounds like he's the chief of all the clans. Isn't that the same as the Three Gods Emissary? There was a lot of discussion. Just then, the chief of the Blackwater clan, who had dropped to the 4th place, jumped onto the stage and questioned loudly, But you said that Roland Wimbledon was the king of the Northern Kingdom. If he wasn't a Majin, how could he rule the entire desert? Here it comes, Ashes thought to herself. This was one of the key problems in bringing the southernmost region into Grey Castle. Now, it was up to Echo how to deal with it. Echo looked at him and asked calmly, So the Three Gods emissary who once ruled the desert were all Majins? Her voice was not loud, but it reverberated in everyone's ears through the transmission of magic power. The chief of the Blackwater clan was no exception. He could not help but be stunned. This. We all know that the answer is no. Seeing that he was speechless, Echo looked at the crowd again and said, The Three Gods emissary was a real giant. In the legends, they didn't look the same. Some had 4 legs and 3 hands, and some had many heads. But there's no doubt that they were not Majins. At this point, she suddenly raised her voice a lot. The few words left by the emissary became a common rule for the Majin Sand people to abide by. These laws engraved on the stone slabs happened to record the ruler of the desert. One was to receive the blessings of the three gods, and the other was to open up a vast and boundless oasis so that all the people could avoid hunger, thirst, and death. As long as one could do one of them, he should be the master of the southernmost region. The discussion suddenly quieted down. No one would object to the laws left by the three gods' emissary in the land of fire. In fact, even the holy duel was based on the distribution of power in the laws. But the three gods' emissary did make the desert evergreen. The chief of the Blackwater clan was unwilling to be ignored. He pointed at Echo and said loudly, "It said that thousands of years ago, this place itself was an oasis. Can the king of Grey Castle also do that? Don't be blinded by false interests. With that kind of power, what's the difference between him and a god? So as long as he can bring a new oasis to the Sand People, you'll recognize his majesty as the master of the southernmost region, right?" Echo raised the corner of her mouth. "That's right. And it's not just me, I'm afraid the other clansmen also think so." The chief of the Blackwater tribe did not mention the first condition at all, and tied the opinions of most of the Sand Nation people to himself. It's true that His Majesty couldn't turn the southernmost region into a green land, but he was willing to take us into Grey Castle and let us live by the lake and the forest, where we would never be threatened by thirst and sandstorms. Echo walked to the front of the stage and said word by word, "This is the promise given by His Majesty. He will bring a new oasis. And the vast and fertile north is the boundless oasis that will never fade." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air and almost couldn't believe their ears. Thuram was equally shocked. So that was the real purpose of the Osha clan. This was the meaning of the new oasis and new order that Iron Axe had mentioned. It was the dream of all Majins to have an evergreen land. For those small clans who were unable to compete for the Iron Sand City, this temptation was even more unimaginable. Even if the big clans were hesitant and unwilling to see the order of the southernmost region change dramatically, they could not stop the spread of the news. Perhaps in less than half a month, this amazing news would be spread throughout the desert by the clansmen from the Silverstream Oasis. No, this is simply nonsense. It's a lie, a deception. The chief of the Blackwater tribe shouted loudly, "Have you all forgotten the tragedy of the Blackbone clan and the Sandstone clan? It was because they believed the words of the Queen of Clearwater, Garcia, that they were killed and their clans exterminated. Give them an oasis and a water source? The cunning northerners won't do that. They'll only give you a pond, a fist-sized territory, and let you fight for it endlessly like in the southernmost region, and you'll have to work for them with your lives." Thuram sighed imperceptibly. If it had been before the holy duel, this speech would have indeed played an excellent deterrent role, but now it was too late. The benevolent image of the Osha clan had already spread throughout the small oasis. With a little guidance, it would not be difficult to make people form the same benevolent image of the king of the northern kingdom behind the Osha clan, and obviously, a benevolent person would not oppress the Sand Nation like the Queen of Clearwater. Moreover, challengers like Blackbone and Sandstone were willing to sell themselves to Garcia cheaply, which was enough to show the attraction of a place to live. Even if they knew it might be a trap, there would still be clansmen who went there with the mentality of giving it a try. If the king of Grey Castle sincerely wanted to bring the southernmost region under his jurisdiction, this group of pioneers would inevitably become an example for more clans. As long as this was started, the whole clan's northward migration was almost a foregone conclusion. From creating a momentum to attract the attention of many clans, to creating a benevolent image by not killing a single person, to becoming the head of the clans through the indisputable holy duel, and at the same time, to making the other large clans who had been pardoned unwilling to turn against Osha in public, all these steps had obviously been planned long ago. He had thought that he would play a pivotal role in the Osha clan settling in Iron Sand City, but only now did he realize that he had only provided the clansmen that Osha needed, as well as information about the clans in Iron Sand City. As for the real plan, he was completely kept in the dark, The other side did not take settling in Iron Sand City seriously at all, and revenge would be a piece of cake for them. He had to admit that he was a little disappointed. But the disappointment only lasted for a moment, and Thurum soon cheered up again. If everything was as his new master said, Osha would undoubtedly become the head of the clans. Then, as a member of Osha, he would obviously benefit greatly from it. Compared to the bright future ahead, this little disappointment was nothing. As expected, Echo shook her head lightly. "You're wrong, Chief. What Garcia needs are mercenaries, not citizens. This is the biggest difference between her and His Majesty Roland. Because of this, she chose Blackbone and Sandstone, who were stronger in combat. But His Majesty is different. He sees all Majins as his people, so any clan can go to the Kingdom of Grey Castle. It has nothing to do with the number of young men in the clan or the strength of the clan. He doesn't need the Sand Nation to work for him. No merciful king will sit by and watch his people die needlessly." "But what's the price? We have to pay something, don't we?" Chief Gwells of Wild Flame stood up. "He won't help the Sand Nation for no reason, and I don't believe that there is such a thing in this world that doesn't care about rewards." He clenched his teeth. "Tell me, I'm willing to accept. What His Majesty wants is very simple, that is, work," Echo said frankly. Echo said calmly, "Just like his millions and millions of people work for the kingdom, work for themselves. Receive a salary, improve their lives, receive education, raise their children. This is all he wants." "Just like this?" Gwells could not help but be startled. "That's right. A way to survive without fighting and struggling." Echo's tone rose again. "Everyone knows that the Silverstream Oasis is becoming fewer and fewer. When I was a child, I could occasionally see traces of oasis at the southern end of Endless Cape. But now, the white wasteland in the northwest is constantly expanding, and the oasis is turning into sand. Even the small oasis around Iron Sand City is smaller than before. Do the Majins plan to fight for survival by killing and dueling, soak their blood in the yellow sand, and finally disappear from the southernmost region with the oasis? Tell me, are you willing to accept this result?" "No, Your Majesty. I want to go with you, Your Majesty Silvermoon. Please take me with you." There was a burst of noise from the crowd, like a wave, spreading from the center of the high platform to the surroundings. Looking at the beautiful woman on the platform who had gathered the attention of many clans, Iron Axe could not help but kneel on one knee, a line of hot tears welling up in his eyes. This scene had appeared in his dreams countless times, especially on the night when Osha became a challenger. However, when he woke up from his dream, the clans no longer existed, and the princess became a slave. He had thought that he would never see such a day again. But now, what Echo had achieved was one step closer to his dream. This feeling made his eyes water, but his heart felt incomparably full and proud. Osha had finally received the three gods' favor. I know there are still people who have doubts, but the truth will prove everything. Echo raised her right hand and said loudly, "Those clans who are willing to go with me to the southern region of Grey Castle can now pack up and set off for the small oasis. Those who come later, don't worry. I will leave some people in the oasis to guide any clans who want to go to the Northern Kingdom to a suitable place to live. As long as you abide by the laws of Grey Castle, you will be people under the protection of His Majesty. Grey Castle will always be open to you." No one knew who made the first cheer, but it was like a drop of ink falling into water, quickly creating ripples that quickly spread to the entire Land of Fire. The big clans were still silent, but compared to the others under the high platform, they seemed insignificant. For the first time, the voices of the clans from every corner of Silverstream overwhelmed the voices of Iron Sand City. A crack appeared in the primitive and old-fashioned order. A new order was taking shape in the boiling cauldron of voices. It looked young and immature, but it exuded infinite vitality. People knelt down one after another, cheering for the new head of the clans, and bowing their heads to pay respect to the birth of the great chief. Not everyone had the courage to be a pioneer, but there were always some people who would give everything for the evergreen land in their hearts. That day, people's cheers spread endlessly in the Land of Fire. Chapter 774. Through the sigil of listening, Roland received the result of the last holy duel and everything that had happened in the Land of Fire that afternoon. He immediately called Maggie, Lightning, and Nana to his office. A witch in Iron Sand City is seriously injured and needs your help. Roland looked at the three little girls in front of him, who were holding their heads high and chest out. Get ready tonight and set off tomorrow. You don't have to fly too fast. Just arrive at Fallen Dragon Ridge before dark and arrive at Iron Sand City the next day. Ashes will meet you there. Are we both going? Lightning pointed at herself and Maggie. Yes, I'll be relieved when you two are together. He nodded and said, and Maggie alone can't tie Nana to her back, can she? Remember to wear more clothes. It's not easy to fly in this weather. Nana looked at the falling snow outside the window and could not help shivering. Got it. I'll deliver it on time. Coo. Maggie raised her hand and said, it's not a problem to fly there. Lightning pouted and said, but you have to wait for me to come back to explore the snow mountain. If I miss such a great adventure, I'll cry. Well, the appearance of the greatest explorer crying. That's a moment worth recording. Looking at the little girl's serious eyes, Roland could not help laughing. He knew that Lightning had been looking forward to it for a long time since the news that there might be relics in the Great Snow Mountain spread. Of course, you're all indispensable members of the exploration team. I can promise you that. Then it's a deal. She was relieved and patted her chest. Leave the injured sisters to us. You can treat the other Sand Nation people on the way, but don't stay too long, Roland finally ordered. After Nana uses up her magic power, set off on the same day and take the same route as when we left. Do you understand? The migration of the tequila survivors was coming to an end and the exploration of the snow mountain was about to begin. However, if Nana was not in Neverwinter, he did not dare to let the witches go to that unknown place rashly. Yes, Your Majesty. All right. Goo. The three of them answered in unison. When they left, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. So you've successfully conquered the southernmost region? Nightingale poked her head out from behind. I can only say that I've taken the first step. Roland smiled. There are still many things to do. At this point, after more than a month of fighting, the desert operation had finally come to an end. However, the upcoming migration was the highlight of the show. He spread out the map on the corner of the mahogany table and set his eyes on the southern border of Grey Castle. He had told Iron Axe everything about giving the Sand Nation a new oasis before he set off, and his first choice was the borderland which had lost its lord and a large population. After the continuous civil war between Timothy and Garcia, the port of Clearwater, Eagle City, and other major cities had been reduced to ruins, and many of the surrounding towns and farmlands had also been destroyed. As more and more refugees moved into Neverwinter, the Southern Territory became more and more deserted. Instead of leaving it there to grow grass, it was better to let the Sand Nation enter the Southern Territory to reclaim the land and rebuild the port of Clearwater along the border between the desert and the green land. In this way, the workers who mined the Blackwater could set off from the port of Clearwater and go to the southern end of the desert by sea. According to Iron Axe's report, most of the underground sticks were located in the south of the Land of Fire, and the most common ones were in the Endless Cape. There was a tributary of the Blackwater that flowed close to the surface and the coast. Compared with the dangerous land route, sailing along the coast was obviously much safer. With the current technology of Neverwinter, it was undoubtedly the most suitable place to collect the Blackwater. It might take a long time for the news to spread in the southernmost region, and the clans who heard the news might not necessarily go to the Southern Territory immediately, but it was not a big problem. The oasis was almost irresistible to the Sand Nation. It did not matter if only one or two clans or hundreds of people were willing to go to the oasis at the beginning. With a pioneer, the others would sooner or later follow and become subjects under his rule. In this way, there were many advantages. In addition to obtaining a large number of laborers, the land would not be completely deserted, and the recovery of settlements could also prevent the spread of roving bandits. Roland did not need to transfer a large number of people from Neverwinter to work in the desert, and those who did not want to leave the southern territory could also find a place to live. Of course, there were also hidden dangers. That was the integration of the people of the kingdom and the Sand Nation of the Majin Kingdom. But Roland was not too worried about this. Not to mention that nationalism had not been awakened, the gods in this world were quite thought-provoking. They did not have a strong religious atmosphere, but were more like pure worship of nature. Both sides spoke the same language, and some of the customs of the Sand Nation were not so much a special culture as they had to change to adapt to the desert. Iron Axe and Echo were the best examples. The two wandered all the way to Border Town and did not seem to be out of place. Therefore, as long as the law was strictly enforced and the rewards and punishments were clear, Roland believed that the Sand Nation of the Majin Kingdom could also be transformed into qualified laborers. Even if there was a rebellion, the first army stationed in the Southern Territory and Fallen Dragon Ridge would not just sit there and watch. In fact, compared to the integration problem, Roland was more concerned about the legends that Iron Axe had mentioned and the hybrid demonic beast that had attacked the witches during the duel. If the former was not wrong, it sounded like an irresistible accident had led to the desertification of the southernmost region. Geographically speaking, this protruding corner of the continent was not too far from Grey Castle, so such a drastic change should not have happened. Unfortunately, he did not have enough people to explore the southernmost region, so he had to put this doubt aside. The behavior of the hybrid was even more inconceivable. Roland had already known that this kind of abnormal creature had a certain degree of intelligence, but why on earth did it take the risk to attack the witches? If the demonic beasts in the inland besieged the human cities under the influence of the relics of the gods, then the four-winged eagle obviously did not attack the witches alone for this reason. Just as Roland was pondering, Vendi and Phyllis knocked on the door and came in. "Your Majesty, the last batch of tequila facilities will soon arrive at the third border city. Pasha invites you to meet her in the underground world." Roland felt refreshed and thought, finally! The so-called third border city was an underground cave at the foot of the impassable mountain range. Its function was similar to that of an underground city. In essence, it was a huge hidden fortress. The last facilities were the instrument of divine retribution and the relics of the gods. In order to ensure their smooth arrival, the First Army in Neverwinter had also participated in the transportation. What about the demonic beasts? Any movements? There are no signs of large-scale gathering for the time being. Chapter 775. The entrance to the cave was located in the north of Neverwinter, at the junction of the city and the mountain range. Halfway up the mountain was the never-ending mine and furnace area. As they approached the foot of the mountain, a sturdy concrete wall appeared in front of them. There were sentry towers at the four corners of the wall, with barbed wire hanging from the top and two machine gun pillboxes at the entrance. Although some facilities were still under construction, this had become the most heavily guarded area in Neverwinter. Under the saluting gaze of the guards, Roland walked into the courtyard. Although it was only a wall, he suddenly had the illusion that he had traveled more than 1,000 years. The scene inside was definitely not something that could be seen in this era. It was a huge hole covered with concrete, more than 10 meters wide and more than 5 meters high. On both sides of the hole were two magnificent iron gates, which not only exceeded the size of the hole, but also reached an astonishing 1 meter thick thickness. Although it was not solid cast, but made up of several layers of steel plates, the total thickness of the armor was more than half a meter. It was completely a heavy partition door that could only be found in modern military fortresses. Due to the heavy weight of the iron gate, the hole had to be reinforced and a slide track was installed on the ground. Even so, it was impossible to move it by manpower alone. Therefore, there were also two steam engines on one side of the courtyard wall, one of which was responsible for providing power to open and close the gate. Once the demonic beasts broke through the defense lines set by the Tequila Witches, after the relics of the gods were withdrawn, this gate would block any demonic beasts that followed behind. In order to build it, Neverwinter had consumed almost 1/3 of the entire winter's steel output. The square shape did not seem to have any technical content, But the huge size of the project itself meant that it was very technical. Standing in front of the partition door that was as big as a building, Roland could feel the vigorous power contained in it. On the day when the gate was installed, he saw the scene of the iron gate opening and closing with his own eyes. The dull roar of the steam engine, the harsh friction of the wheels, and the huge object that was slowly approaching almost seemed to be in charge of the entrance to the end of the world. There was a line of twisted words on both sides of the iron gate, which, when put together, meant the third border city. The group of people walked into the hole, and the light instantly dimmed. Phyllis took out the stone of lighting and walked to the front of the team, leading them into the underground cavern. "Your Majesty, I don't understand why you call this place the third border city." Vendi was puzzled. If the border area outside is the first city, then where is the second border city? "Because 3 is more appropriate," Roland replied. "Anyway, don't you think the number 3 matches the stronghold? Besides, the name isn't important as long as people remember it." He spread his hands. "All right if you like." Vendi curled her lips. After the conversation, there was only the echoing sound of footsteps and dripping water in the cave. Due to the lack of concrete spraying tools, only the ground of this passage had been hardened. On the left and right sides were drainage ditches and mine tracks. When it was necessary to transport materials and food, the steam engine installed in the cave would pull trailers to transport them. Roland had heard from Phyllis that some gods' punishment witches were interested in the strength of this machine. In the end, they found that even if 5 of them held a hemp rope together, they could not stop the steam engine from pulling them to the destination step by step. Since the walls and the top of the cave could not be covered with concrete, water seepage was inevitable. Fortunately, the temperature in the mountain was not too low, so the road would not freeze. Wherever the devouring worm crawled, it would also leave a trail of mucus. When it dried up, it would stick the soil together like a layer of paste, so they did not have to worry about the risk of the cave collapsing. After walking for about half an hour, the cave gradually became brighter. "We're almost there." Phyllis slowed down. "Your Majesty, do you need to?" Roland knew what she wanted to say. "It doesn't matter. Take me there now." The gods' punishment witches looked back at him deeply and said, "Yes, I understand." Walking out of the cave, their field of vision suddenly opened up. A spacious vaulted hall appeared in front of them. The area was about the size of a football field. Above their heads, they could see dozens of beams of light shining into the cave, reflecting light spots on the ground. With the help of the light well, even though it was deep in the mountains, it did not seem to be oppressive. There were not only witches guarding here, but also many soldiers of the First Army. Each of them had been examined by Nightingale and were the most loyal to Roland in the team. But even they were as far away from the hall as possible at this moment. In the center of the vast open space, there were only a few diamond-shaped magic cores and 3 senior tequila witches, or rather, the original carriers. He smiled and walked toward the 3 witches, reaching out his right hand to the leading blob monster. "We finally meet. You're Pasha, right?" In an instant, Roland felt the breathing behind him quicken. A hand was already on his shoulder. If anything went wrong, Nightingale would undoubtedly pull him into the mist. The blob monster was silent for a moment, and then a familiar voice sounded in his mind. "I'm surprised, Your Majesty." Before, when we talked with the illusory cores, the imaginary scenes were not so daunting. But now, the calmness you show at this moment is incredible. To be honest, you're the first person who has seen this body with his own eyes and can remain calm. Even the tequila witches were not as calm as you when they first saw the original carriers that had not been activated. "I'm very curious. Aren't you afraid at all?" She paused, then stretched out a tentacle and gently wrapped it around his palm. "But you're right, I'm Pasha. Thank you for your support of the tequila witches." He hasn't supported us yet. Just sending a team of mortals to escort the relics is not a help or a surveillance. Another cold consciousness also came in. It's not too late to talk about this after exploring the snow mountain. "Aletheia, we've made a deal before." A third voice interrupted him. "Fine, I won't mention it." It seemed that the other 2 were Aletheia and Celine, who often appeared beside Pasha. Roland didn't mind her tone. Firstly, these ancient witches lived in an era where witches were revered, so it wouldn't be easy for them to change their mindset. Secondly, compared to their attitude on the surface, he was more interested in substantial gains. The most famous explorer in the fjords once said that fear comes from the unknown. No matter what you look like, your soul belongs to the tequila witches. Roland smiled. And I'm no stranger to the latter. Agatha has become an indispensable member of the Witch Union and is deeply trusted and loved by everyone. The tentacle felt quite rough, and its surface was not as dry as it looked. It was slightly moist, probably because it had been drilling in the soil. He could clearly feel the temperature under the skin. There was no doubt that the huge blob in front of him was a living creature. I see. Pasha sounded a little emotional. You're right. We've been working together for a long time. In the face of the threat of demons, everyone should put aside their prejudices and try to unite as much as possible. Roland said a few polite words and then got to the point. By the way, the relics of the gods should have been moved here, right? Can you show me what the thing that determines the fate of human beings looks like? Chapter 776. Roland curiously looked at the moving senior tequila witches. The tentacles on their bodies had a clear division of labor. The short ones twisted like snakes to provide support and walking power. The long ones were constantly inserted into the soil above their heads or under their feet to correct the direction. Some tentacles were obviously amazingly long. Judging from the height of the dome of the hall, they were probably more than 100 meters long, and they could shrink and contract freely like arms. To be able to support such a long tentacle, even the strongest muscles would not be able to do so. He guessed that the magic contained in the sarcomas gave them the power to move freely, just like those giant demonic beasts whose bodies were obviously beyond the limits of gravity. Bypassing the 2 magic cores and walking dozens of steps, Pasha stopped in front of a cube that seemed to be made of gemstones. That's a god's stone of retaliation. I can't get too close. Nightingale reminded him. Roland nodded calmly and asked Pasha, "Is the relic stored in this box?" "Yes, this is the only way to limit the range of its summoning. If there is no god's stone of retaliation around, I'm afraid that the residents in your city will be inadvertently affected by the relic." Pasha stretched out several tentacles and put them on the box of god's stones, but she did not immediately open it. "Before touching it, I have to explain something to you in case of an accident. Is this thing dangerous?" Vendi took a step forward and subconsciously stood in front of Roland. "Don't worry too much, as long as you don't stay alone with the relic." Celine interrupted. "What do you mean?" Roland raised his eyebrows. "As I said before, when you open your heart in front of the relic, you can see some incredible scenes. Whether you are a witch or a mortal, you can feel this kind of summoning." Pasha's tone became a lot more serious. "But please remember, the scenes you see are not completely imaginary. Unlike the phantom instrument, the things in the picture can affect reality. This is the first point I want to make. Never accept the summoning of God alone at any time. The scenes in the picture can affect reality?" Roland suddenly felt a little creeped out. Isn't this like Sadako climbing out of the TV? Why wouldn't it be dangerous with a few more people? Because once one was trapped in the divine realm, the body would show obvious reactions, such as sluggishness, ravings, and so on. At this time, the person next to you would need to drag you out of the range of influence of the relic. In the history books, there were many records of people who came into contact with relics alone, and their souls could not return to their bodies in the end. If 2 or 3 people took turns to touch the relics, this risk could be effectively reduced. "I see." Roland glanced at the tequila witch. "In other words, there are at least 5 people here, so there's almost no danger, right? If not, we wouldn't have dared to let you observe it up close." Celine nodded. "As for the second point, let me explain it to you." Alethia's cold voice sounded. "You should know that the huge picture scroll in the relic shows alien civilizations. If you have the chance to see them, they will definitely try to hurt you. We can help you forcibly break free from the call, but we cannot help you resist your fear." She paused and said with a hint of sarcasm, "Don't say I didn't warn you if you are scared and lose your composure." "That's it." Roland was unmoved. "Is there anything else you want to say?" Alethea probably did not expect him to be so indifferent. She could not help but feel a little suffocated. "If not, open it." Roland sighed in his heart. For modern people who had seen all kinds of monsters, aliens, thrillers, and horror movies, there was a huge difference in the degree of acceptance between people in the ancient times and people in the modern times. If he was unprepared, he might be scared out of his wits. However, Alethea's words, in a sense, were equivalent to a high-energy warning. As long as it did not cause real harm, he did not think he would give up exploring the mystery of the divine realm because of this degree of intimidation. "I know." Pasha retracted her tentacles and opened the door of the god's stone box, revealing the spindle-shaped red crystal inside. After leaving the container, the relic floated naturally, like the magic cores, quietly suspended in the air about a meter above the ground. "It can't leave the restricted area of the god's stone, so you need to get close to it, relax your mind, and then you can go to the divine realm." "Your Majesty!" Vendi grabbed Roland's hand worriedly. "Don't worry, with you watching, nothing will happen." He patted the back of the red-haired witch's hand comfortingly. "I know what I'm going to face." Not all of the information he obtained came from the Tequila witches. Whether it was Isabella's memories or his investigation of the pivotal secret temple of the church in the dream world, he could confirm that there was indeed such a thing that could bring people into the incredible divine realm. Roland walked to the relic, sat cross-legged, and closed his eyes. At the same time, Pasha also stretched out her tentacles and connected with the other two companions. Their consciousness quickly flowed between the three of them, mapping what they wanted to say to each other in their minds. How could he be so arrogant? I really want to see him tremble in fear and pee in his pants. Otherwise, he would never realize what a terrible enemy he was about to face. Alethea said indignantly. "Let's see what he has to say when he is so scared that he pees himself on the spot. What good would that do us?" Celine glared at her angrily. Mortals care a lot about their dignity and prestige. If we make him lose face, I'm afraid he will hate us too. If we lose his support, how can we explore the snow mountain and find the chosen one? What's worse, if he becomes afraid of the demon, the world will be over. He is not afraid of anything. Anyway, I have already reminded him. Can you still stop him? Bringing him to the relic is a mistake, Celine muttered. I didn't suggest this from the beginning, at least not until both sides have a basic trust. And then hide it from him? Or stop him from getting close to the relic. That way we will never get his trust. Pasha sighed softly and put herself in his shoes. Would you trust an ally who did not even want you to get close to the key thing that determined the fate of mankind? No matter how nice you said it, the other party would not appreciate it. Therefore, some things must wait for him to experience personally to understand our sincerity. But don't worry too much, the demon and the giant eye will not appear every time. Pasha seemed to be comforting Celine, but also comforting herself. Even if he is frightened and loses his composure, as long as we promise to keep our mouths shut and let this scene never be known to the world, he should be able to understand our difficulties. What about the two witches he brought with him? Will they also keep this a secret? Alethea asked maliciously. There was no doubt that in her opinion, it was quite a pleasant thing to make a mortal lose face in front of a witch. That's not something we can control. Chapter 777. The Starry Sky Dome, the Bloody Moon, the Huge Painting. Just as Pasha had described. No matter what it was, it gave people a feeling that it was incomparably grand. Only when one was in it could one truly feel its vastness. It was no wonder that they called this place the realm of gods. Is this the teleportation spell? Or the sea of consciousness? Roland squatted down and gently touched the floor. It looked like it was made of polished stone, but its surface was as smooth as a mirror. His fingertips accurately felt the cold and hard touch, as if what he saw was not a fantasy, but a real thing. However, after experiencing the dream world that was so realistic that it was exaggerated, such a scene could no longer scare him. Roland looked up at the dome. The huge crimson moon was like a round pancake covering the giant painting. If he looked closely, he could even see the surging lines on its surface. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be the sea. It was not as dazzling as the sun. Although it was red all over, it did not seem to be glowing or heating up. The red ripples were like waves or whirlpools, densely covering his entire field of vision. The only problem was that this circle was a bit too round. It was not like a sphere at all, but a large flat circle. Perhaps the bloody moon was too close to him? Roland carefully looked at it for a while, but he could not connect it with the red flying star observed by astrologers. It was neither like a planet nor a star. If the battle of divine will was really caused by it, how could it come to the world? Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. If the chief astrologer of Dispersion Star was summoned by the relic, could he confirm that this thing was indeed the bloody moon from the faintly shining stars on the dome? Of course, it was more likely that the poor old man was scared to death. Roland shrugged, stood up, and looked around at the 4 huge paintings surrounding the bloody moon. The throne, the sea, the black screen, and himself. Except for the scene in the underground hall of the Third Border City, these records were all read in the library of the pivotal secret temple. There was nothing special about them. The relic was probably like a recorder that could feed back the scene around it in real time. According to Pasha, the completely black painting belonged to the eliminated underground civilization. Roland called out to himself and Vendi in the painting, but the latter two did not respond. Obviously, they could not hear him. What happened to influencing reality? He walked closer to the throne scroll and reached out to touch the scroll itself. It felt like a soft and smooth cloth. The texture was very fine, and the image on it was just an image. He could not cross the border and enter the world of the painting. Roland didn't find anything new after walking around. He was about to head out of the palace to see if this place was really boundless when the scroll behind him suddenly made a noise. In this quiet environment, the sound was exceptionally clear, like the friction between steel or the echo of a hard object hitting the ground. In that instant, he felt all the hair on his body stand on end. Damn it, no one mentioned that these giant paintings could make sounds. He stopped and turned around abruptly. A pitch-black armored warrior had appeared in the painting of the throne. It was sitting on the throne, and a pair of scarlet eyes were looking down at him. Meanwhile, the other painting also started to move. A large number of bubbles surged up with a muffled sound, and then a huge eyeball stretched out from the dark bottom of the sea and approached the edge of the painting, as if it wanted to poke out of the frame. 3 triangular eyes stared at him at the same time, which made him a little uncomfortable at first glance. Did you make an appointment? Roland couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. As long as they didn't hide and play tricks, he was not afraid of these 2 monsters who didn't look scary at all. They were just senior demons and the guardians of the relics of an unknown civilization. He raised his head and walked to the center of the 4 giant paintings, looking at the 2 alien creatures. Good afternoon. Are you also here to participate in the battle of divine will? Do we have to fight this life and death war? Can't we just sit down and talk? Can you understand what I'm saying? Even if you don't understand, you should squeak. Hey, is this a game to test your willpower? Whoever closes their eyes first loses? Roland tried to communicate with them, but he didn't get any response. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to feel that the demon's chest was rising and falling more rapidly, and the huge eyeball was gradually trembling. Was this the side effect of staring at him? Could it be that they could only stare at him and see whose eyes would ache first? How could this be considered dangerous? Even if he came here alone, it wouldn't be a problem. He rolled his eyes and was about to stop this boring staring contest when a group of black tentacles suddenly appeared in the painting. Like snakes, they pounced on the demon and the eyeball and tied them up tightly. What the hell is this? Roland couldn't help but be stunned. The demon finally moved. It grabbed the throne tightly and let out a series of strange sounds. Flames and transparent sharp blades suddenly appeared around it, fighting with the tentacles. However, the number of tentacles was astonishing, and the seemingly soft little hand at the end could easily break the weapons summoned by the opponent. The demon seemed to be fighting with an invisible strong enemy, and its screams became more and more intense. Even Roland could feel the tension in its tone. As a bolt of lightning burst out from the armor, the tentacles finally stepped back and loosened their grip on the demon. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the demon staggered up from the seat and ran out of the scope of the huge painting without looking back. In its panic, it even broke a part of the armrest of the throne. The giant eye was not any better. Several tentacles had already pierced into its eyeball, and just looking at it was painful. Light blue liquid trickled out of the pierced part, as if it was crying. Instead of making strange sounds like the demon, the giant eye constantly shot out dazzling light from its 3 pupils, blocking most of the tentacles. Suddenly, all the pupils of the giant eye opened at the same time, and a looming wave suddenly rushed towards the huge painting. Roland suddenly felt a stinky smell on his face, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. The tentacles also loosened their entanglement on the eyeball, and the eyeball quickly slid back to where it came from, disappearing into the darkness in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the blue waves of the sea above his head were rapidly darkening, and it seemed that the view was sinking. After a while, he couldn't see any light at all. That's it? Chapter 778. 15 minutes have passed. Celine breathed a sigh of relief. It seems that he didn't encounter anything. What a pity. He's lucky, Alethea said with flagging interest. I don't want to pin the result on probability at all, she complained. Please choose a more secure method next time, okay? Let's not talk about what happened. Alethea changed the subject. Guess how long a mortal king can stay in there? In the records left by mortals in the Land of Dawn, the longest time was less than a quarter of an hour, right? Witches are no better. The time they can stay in the Divine Land has nothing to do with magic power. Even the Union has a group of mortals who take turns to monitor the relics. But considering the age and experience of the king, he should come out soon. According to all the records Celine had read, warriors who had personally experienced the battlefield and fought with demons would generally stay longer, regardless of whether they were witches or mortals. The highest record was set by Lady Alice, who lasted for almost 2 hours. As a king who was behind the scenes, it was already very good to have such a performance. Maybe he will want to stay longer. After all, it is the first time he has seen such a magical place. Then he will feel dizzy or even pass out. Celine suddenly realized something and looked at Pasha. Did you forget to tell him about this? Passing out is not a loss of composure, and it won't cause any real harm. Pasha waved her tentacles. On the contrary, this uncomfortable experience of spiritual exhaustion can reduce his impulse to touch the relics of the gods, which is a good thing for everyone. So, you didn't forget. Pasha did not deny. Some things are better left unsaid. If it were us, we wouldn't want to be restricted too much when exploring the Divine Land, right? Now I understand why Lady Natalia chose you to be one of the 3 seats candidates. Alethea smacked her lips. Celine could not help but have the same feeling. Compared to being frightened to the point of losing his composure, fainting out of spiritual exhaustion could be seen as an exit without side effects. It could reduce the curiosity of mortals and not destroy the relationship between them. Obviously, Pasha thought more deeply than either of them. But after waiting for a while, she frowned slightly. It has been more than a quarter of an hour. Is he okay? Pasha glanced at Roland Wimbledon, who was still sitting upright, and said, It looks like there's nothing unusual. Sure enough, this mortal king was full of surprises. A new record has been set. Should I say congratulations? Alethea shrugged her mane beard. Celine did not answer. She felt a little uneasy and felt that something was wrong. What happened next seemed to verify her guess. After another quarter of an hour, Roland was still motionless. She felt more and more anxious. Towards the flow of time, a person who had lived for more than 100 years should feel extremely vague, but this body's almost constant heartbeat could accurately tell her the changes of every moment and every breath. 3/4 of an hour of exploration was a little too long no matter how one looked at it. The other party was not an extraordinaire, nor was he a warrior. He should have exhausted all his energy a long time ago. Could it be there was an accident in the god realm that he had never noticed before? Vendi couldn't help but step forward as if she wanted to wake the king up, but Pasha stopped her. If you get too close to the relic, you will also be affected by it. Then let me enter the god realm and bring his majesty back. She insisted. Even if you go in, you can't bring the king back. No matter how many people are inspired by it at the same time, the god realm they see is unique. Celine noticed that the other witch, who had been hiding, also moved. Judging from the vague magic reaction, the witch took out something from her bosom. According to the information Phyllis had gathered, it should be a unique weapon of Neverwinter. After conveying her concern to the other two witches, Pasha nodded and immediately took action. She stretched out her tentacles to entangle the mortal king and pulled him back to Vendi. Although it was not ideal to end the exploration in this way, nothing was more important than Roland's safety. If there was a conflict between the two sides, the consequences would be unimaginable. As the relic was put back into the god's stone box, Roland suddenly opened his eyes. "Your Majesty, are you okay?" Vendi helped him to stand up and asked anxiously. "I'm fine. I'm fine." He rubbed his sore legs. "I saw the foreign monsters guarding the other two relics and talked to them. Unfortunately, they couldn't understand me." What did you say?" Celine was shocked. Did you meet the demons and a huge eyeball? It seemed to be in a ship that could sail underwater." Roland said, "Of course, I'm not sure whether it was a ship or something else." Even though Celine couldn't see her companion's expression, she could feel the shock of the other two witches, especially Aletheia. Among the survivors, Aletheia stayed in the illusion for the longest time. As a member of the Blessed Army, Aletheia could stay in the illusion for about an hour, but that was only when there was nothing in the scroll. If she encountered demons or enemies of another race, her energy consumption would be doubled. Then what happened? Pasha continued to ask. "I don't know. Anyway, some black tentacles suddenly appeared in the scroll and attacked them." Roland briefly described the situation. Those tentacles were very difficult to deal with, so they had to withdraw from the scroll. The whole process took only a few minutes. No, about 3/4 of an hour. Did he mean that he encountered the guardians of the other two civilizations at the same time, and not only was he unharmed, but he also forced them to retreat? Celine felt as if she was listening to a fairy tale. She was not surprised by the appearance of the black tentacles. As the energy consumption continued to decline, the influence of the relics on the explorers would increase. Auditory hallucinations, tentacles, or something else would appear one by one. They were not simple mental disturbances, but they would cause real damage to the body, which was why Pasha emphasized that they were not illusory. Before these influences caused real damage, as long as the summoning was stopped, the explorers would be fine. Of course, if one wanted to forcefully resist this kind of spiritual erosion, it was not something that ordinary people could do. Even a witch who had experienced hundreds of battles would quickly feel tired and eventually lose control of her body. But why was the situation completely reversed for Roland, and even the black tentacles were rushing toward the enemy? This was the first time she heard of such a thing. Celine suddenly had an inconceivable thought as she looked at the king, who seemed to be disapproving of her actions. Could it be that the mental strength of this ordinary person was on par with the head of the three chiefs, Alice, the queen of Starfall City? However, the king obviously did not feel this way. He stretched his limbs and smiled. "But thank you for pulling me out. I wanted to see if there was a boundary to that place, but it turned out to be too far. I really don't want to go back the way I came." "Ahem, is that so?" The three of them were speechless for a while. Pasha broke the silence. "So do you want to continue exploring the relics?" "Yes." Chapter 779. He had always been interested in the central carrier that was mentioned in the previous meeting. It had fused with the souls of numerous witches and sacrificed its consciousness in exchange for the ability to decipher the documents left behind by the underground civilization. Furthermore, it could only answer yes or no. Other than that, it was no different from an inanimate object. All of this gave it a mysterious and tragic aura. However, when Roland saw the central carrier imprisoned in the secret underground chamber of the hall, he could not help but gasp. A sarcoma much larger than Pasha and the others was bound by layers of chains. A few of its thick tentacles were even pulled apart and nailed into the walls or ceiling. Its damaged skin was riddled with scars and many of its tentacles were broken. It was obvious that this was not the first time it had been treated in such a manner. If he remembered correctly, the central carrier was like the original carrier and had sentience. It could feel cold, heat, sweetness, bitterness, and pain. Why? Roland could not help but frown. Aren't the souls fused with witches? And one of your 3 chiefs? Lady Eleanor, your majesty, Pasha sighed. There is no other choice. The carrier's power is not much lower than Scourge's. Our tentacles can drill through the soil and dig a light well above the dome. Naturally, we can attack our enemies and tear our prey in half. If we do not do this, an unconscious carrier that can move freely would probably cause more trouble than a hybrid demonic beast. So that's why. Roland immediately understood her helplessness. The tentacle sarcoma was probably the basic combat unit of the underground civilization. Once an unconscious carrier within the base lost control, it would pose a great threat to the relics of the gods and the magic power core. The survivors of Tequila were obviously unable to accept such a risk and had no other choice but to imprison it. Unfortunately, even though he knew, he still sighed in his heart. After all, the witches who had willingly fused with Tequila had given up everything, but now they could only be trapped in this dark corner, unable to move. We've tried to ask them how they feel, but we never got an answer. The fused souls can no longer be extracted through the magic core, so we don't know if they feel the stimulation from the outside world. Roland thought. But we didn't get an answer. The fused souls can't be extracted through the magic core, so we don't know if they feel the stimulation from the outside world. Becoming one with Lady Eleanor is the ultimate goal of every Tequila witch. We are no exception, so you don't have to worry about it. Alethea, who had been silent all this while, spoke again. However, Roland didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the other party's voice wasn't as cold as before. It should have leveled up from ice to ice water. However, when we asked if we wanted to imprison the central carrier, the 3 main tentacles all answered yes. Celine added, otherwise, we wouldn't have fixed her so thoroughly. Roland nodded. There's a painter named Soroya in the Witch Union who can draw extremely flexible fabrics. There's also a little girl named Softfeathers who can make objects sticky. If the 2 abilities were used together, they would be able to produce an even stronger binding force than the iron chains. Using this method to tie her up, at least she wouldn't be covered in injuries. If you don't have any objections? No, it would be great if that's the case. The main beard on Pasha's head drooped slightly. Please accept my gratitude. It doesn't matter. It's just a piece of cake. Roland waved his hand. But, what does it mean when all 3 main tentacles say yes? Is it possible that one of them says yes and the other says no? Then who should we listen to? Let Celine explain this question for you. It's like this. Celine was quite excited to be able to help reduce the pain of her fused companions. She immediately said, the biggest difference between the central carrier and us is that she has 3 main tentacles. She can transmit more complicated messages without using conscious communication, just like I am now. As soon as she finished speaking, the main tentacle on her head emitted a faint red light. This can also emit light? Before we completely mastered conscious communication, we often used it to express our feelings and emotions, but we didn't use it much after that. Celine moved to the center of the secret chamber and pointed to the 3 main tentacles of the central carrier that were firmly nailed to the ground. But they can't do that because they have lost their consciousness. They can only answer through the red light. If it's bright, it means yes. If it's not, it means no. However, when we were deciphering the documents of the underground civilization, we realized that a simple yes or no could not help us find the correct answer quickly. She continued to explain. For example, a sentence that means I am a tequila witch, if translated to I am a witch or I am a tequila witch, it will be displayed as no. As such, even a simple sentence will require a lot of time to confirm. So you used 3 answers to express the degree of closeness. Roland immediately understood their thoughts. Your comprehension ability is indeed extraordinary, Celine praised. That's right. The closer you are to the real answer, the more red light will light up. When all 3 main tentacles light up, it is equivalent to being completely correct. Of course, it also means special recognition. So, with Eleanor as the leader, the fused souls did not reject their companions from imprisoning them underground. Roland could not help but be moved. Although he did not know if they made the judgment based on the safety of the base, or if they answered based on their own feelings, this decision made him sigh with emotion. He took a deep breath. Can I ask her some questions? Of course. Celine moved away. Just ask the question directly. Of course. Roland walked in front of the central carrier and said slowly, suppose I have 2 baskets with 2 apples in each. After pouring them out, there will be 4 apples on the ground, right? The 3 tentacles instantly lit up. Is that what you wanted to ask? Celine asked in surprise. Your Majesty, Vendi also felt a little awkward. What did you think of? Just a test. Roland asked again without changing his expression. Then I have 12,345 baskets with 54,321 apples in each. If I pour them all out, how many apples will there be on the ground? He took out a small piece of paper from his pocket. I guess it will be, right? That was the answer he had prepared in advance. The result was a 9-digit number, which was considered a complicated calculation in this era. Those who had not received mathematics education in Neverwinter would not be able to come up with the answer in a short time. This could be seen from the silence of the senior tequila witches. Chapter 780. She really can figure it out. Regardless of whether the central carrier used the additive method or the linear multiplication method, the fact that she could get the answer in an instant showed that her calculation ability was far superior to that of an ordinary person. Even if she could only answer yes or no, it would still be of great help to the Arithmetic Academy. At least she could use it to verify the result and reduce the error rate of large-scale complex calculations. Roland squatted down happily and patted the main tentacle. You're amazing. The red light went out. Your Majesty, she can't communicate with you, Pasha reminded him. She can understand what I say and answer yes or no. This is already a kind of communication. The essence of communication was receiving and giving back. At most, she could only say that she was limited by the output and could not talk like a normal person. Roland waved his hand carelessly. Maybe it was time to try to see if she could really only give a yes or no expression. Think of 1 glowing tentacle as 1, 2 as 2, and so on. Can you use the red light to represent 3? Roland thought for a while and asked. This question was much simpler than the multiplication of 5-digit numbers, but the meaning behind it was very different. If she answered yes, it meant that she could use more complex expressions to expand the feedback content. With her super calculation ability, she might even be able to display the result directly. However, the central carrier did not give an immediate answer like before. After a few seconds, one of the tentacles glowed red, another glowed faintly, and the last one remained silent. According to Celine, 1 glowing, 1 weak, and 1 extinguished meant that the answer was 30% correct. Unfortunately, the answer did not last long. The glimmering one was quickly extinguished, and even the tentacle that glowed red at first also dimmed after a while. Now the answer was no. Your question is beyond her ability, Celine sighed. If she answers yes, it means that she needs to give an answer beyond yes or no, which will aggravate the confusion in her mind. She paused and then continued. In fact, We've tried to let the central carrier express simple meanings or even short sentences. But once it exceeds a simple judgment of right or wrong, her response speed will be greatly reduced, and she will easily fall into confusion like now. In other words, is there a logical obstacle? Roland frowned and said, "Is it okay for her to be like this? She'll recover after some rest." Celine waved her tentacles. At that time, I asked her some contradictory questions. As a result, she ignored us for half a month. It seemed that the biological computer was not that easy to learn, he thought to himself. Since the central carrier could determine the result of the calculation, it meant that she knew the answer. The key was how to display the answer in its original form. Perhaps he had to find a way to answer with yes and no, but also to express it in a complex way. Only then would he be able to achieve this. However, this idea was beyond the scope of his knowledge. Coding and engineering were hostile to each other, and there was almost no overlap in their professional content. After thinking about it for a while, Roland gave up on the idea of doing research on his own. By the way, I remember you said that the carrier needs soil and heat to maintain its vitality. Is there magma here too? Fran hasn't dug that deep yet, but we've found a boiling river. There should be a lava zone nearby. In addition, there is a smell of sulfur in the river, and it feels good to soak in it. If you want to ask about the central carrier, we draw a lot of hot water to give her a bath every few days, so you don't have to worry about this. In other words, magma was not a necessity, and hot water could make do with it. This was undoubtedly good news. If he wanted to lure her to the Computation Academy, he only needed to provide a boiler to boil water to meet her daily needs. Of course, it was far from the time to mention this matter. The Tequila Witches had just moved and had not officially joined the United Front. At this time, it would undoubtedly be difficult to ask for her. Moreover, when those astrologers saw such a huge tentacle monster, they might not be able to maintain their sage demeanor in the past. Everything had to wait until the exploration of the Snow Mountain was completed and both sides had established basic trust. After leaving the secret chamber, the tour of the third border city came to an end. At present, the outline of this underground city had been excavated, and at best, it was just an underground residence. When all the passages connecting the impassable mountain peaks were opened, it would be like a real hidden stronghold, connected with the turrets and camps on the ground as a whole, becoming a part of the impassable mountain defense line. When Roland returned to the castle, he immediately summoned the directors of the major departments in the city hall to the reception hall. Then, as everyone gasped, a purple light curtain slowly opened and enveloped the entire hall. Even though they had been warned in advance, when this unimaginable illusion really appeared in front of everyone, all the managers' expressions changed drastically. The younger Minister of Agriculture, Sirius Daly, even accidentally knocked over the teacup on the table. Barav kept wiping the sweat from his forehead, while Kyle Sichi and Astrologer of Dispersion Star widened their eyes. If it were not for the fact that His Majesty was still sitting in the main seat, they would have fled. The only one who could still be considered calm was Edith. Although this woman from an aristocratic family in the northern region had also shrunk back, her eyes were still mixed with excitement and curiosity. Moreover, Roland unexpectedly noticed that there was a trace of reverence in her eyes when she looked at him. Well, he had to admit that women's thoughts were really hard to understand. Except for Edith, the reactions of the others were basically within Roland's expectations. However, since they wanted to form a united front against the demons, it was impossible to keep the existence of the tequila survivors a secret forever. They would show up on the stage sooner or later. Rather than asking the city hall about the strange phenomenon at the foot of the mountain in the north of the border area, it would be better for him to introduce the ancient witches to everyone first. After more than 2 years of training, this group of people should have seen a lot of things, and their ability to accept new things had also greatly improved. However, after Roland finished explaining the origin and purpose of the tentacle sarcoma, as well as the cooperation plan to explore the Snow Mountain, most of the managers showed considerable resistance. If it were not for the fact that the ancient witches had some relations with the Witch Union, they would probably have regarded them as alien creatures like the demons. Director Barov said that the finance department had now entered the year-end final settlement stage, so it was not convenient to make new logistical plans. Moreover, the months of demons had not yet ended, and a team had already been sent to the southernmost region. If they sent more troops to the Snow Mountain, it might lead to a shortage of defense forces in the border area. Chief Knight Carter frankly said that the joint operation was not safe, and that the danger might come from within. His distrust was obvious. Sirius, the Minister of Agriculture, stammered that the food reserves might be tight because of the troop deployment plan, and if the news spread, it would easily cause panic among the residents. Carr, the Minister of Construction, was worried that if the ancient witches were allowed to hollow out the mountain, it would cause instability in the upper mining area and lead to collapse. In short, there were all kinds of strange reasons, but the main idea was basically the same. Your Majesty, please think twice. The discussion reached an impasse for a while. If this was a parliamentary discussion, it was obvious that it would be difficult to carry out the cooperation plan. However, Roland did not forget that he was the final arbiter, the Lord of Neverwinter, and also the King of Grey Castle. At this time, it was time for him to forcefully implement the plan. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.